Morgan Chantel Mick was born to Morris and Colleen Nick in Ozark, Arkansas, on September 12, 1988. She was the couple's first child, and later, the family expanded with the birth of 2 more children. Morris was known to be a loving and kind father. Those who knew the couple said they embraced their parental responsibilities, doing everything in their power to make life easier for their children. Though Morris and Colleen initially seemed happy, challenges soon surfaced in their relationship. When Morgan was 6, they decided to separate, which ultimately led to a divorce. The process, however, was amicable, and they never fought over the custody of their children. The children primarily lived with Colleen, a devoted mother who always put her children first. Morgan and Colleen shared a close bond, spending most of their time together. Morgan excelled academically, despite her young age. Having just completed kindergarten, her family could already envision her thriving in elementary school. Personality-wise, Morgan was a shy child with a big heart. She loved apples and was fond of cats, leading her mother to allow her to have one as a pet. Despite her shyness, Morgan was actively involved as a Girl Scout and enjoyed playing with other kids. She dreamt of becoming a circus artist or a doctor when she grew up. On June 9, 1995, Colleen received an invitation from a friend to watch a minor league baseball game in Alma, Arkansas. Thinking Morgan might enjoy watching other kids play, she asked her to accompany her to the game, about 30 minutes away from their home. It was a night game, starting at 9 p.m. Upon arriving, the stands were already packed, but Colleen managed to find a spot for herself and Morgan. However, 6-year-old Morgan soon grew bored and began fidgeting with her shoelaces. Despite being a calm child, usually hesitant to engage with strangers, 2 older kids approached her. They introduced themselves as Jessica and Ty, aged 8 and 10 respectively. There are different accounts of what happened next. In one version, Morgan asked her mother if she could play with Jessica and Ty, but Colleen initially declined. Concerned about the unfamiliar surroundings and the packed venue of almost 300 people, Colleen was hesitant to let Morgan wander off. However, Colleen's friends urged her to let Morgan play, assuring her she was being overprotective and that Morgan would be fine. Eventually, Colleen relented. The kids mentioned wanting to run up a nearby hill to catch fireflies. With the game nearing its end around 10:30 p.m., Colleen allowed Morgan to go, but only for a short while. In another version, when Jessica and Ty invited Morgan to catch fireflies, Morgan's innate shyness made her decline. Yet Colleen's friends thought it would be good for Morgan to interact with other kids. Colleen then persuaded a reluctant Morgan to go with them, even if it meant leaving her mother's side. What's certain is Morgan left the stands with the 2 children. While Colleen tried to keep an eye on them, she got distracted when the baseball game ended and teams came into the stands to greet their families. The next time Colleen looked for the children, she saw Jessica and Ty returning without Morgan. Concerned, she immediately asked them about her daughter's whereabouts. They replied that the girl had disappeared while everyone was emptying sand from their shoes, leaning against Colleen's car. Subsequent investigations revealed that while Jessica and Ty sat at the front of the vehicle shaking out their shoes, Morgan was alone at the back emptying hers. Another significant and worrying detail was that the children insisted they saw a creepy man talking to Morgan before she vanished. Confused and anxious, Colleen immediately raised the alarm, and the adults present at the baseball field helped her search the nearby areas for her missing daughter. However, hours passed in the search without results, and Colleen decided to report the incident to the local police. Those who knew Colleen highlighted her kind nature and how she was always willing to help those in need. Therefore, when she needed support in searching for her child, many showed their solidarity. Additionally, being the devoted mother who always looked out for her children made the community even more outraged at the kidnapper or kidnappers who took Morgan away from her family. On the day she disappeared, Morgan was a beautiful girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Before going to the baseball game with her mother, she had attended her Girl Scouts activities and was wearing the organization's green shirt, blue denim shorts, and white tennis shoes. Another distinguishing feature of the young girl was that she had 5 silver crowns on her molars, a type of cap used to cover and protect the damaged tooth, which were easily visible. When the police were informed of the disappearance, they immediately began their investigation. Officers and local volunteers organized numerous search mobilizations, while detectives went door to door seeking evidence and witnesses. Since Jessica and Ty claimed to have seen a man speaking with Morgan before her disappearance, the police compiled a detailed description of the suspect, who was said to be between 23 and 38 years old with black hair sprinkled with gray, and he had a mustache and beard. Witnesses also reported seeing a faded red pickup truck nearby with a mismatched white camper shell that seemed too small by a couple of inches. They noticed possible damage to the back right corner of the vehicle. Some claimed the truck had Arkansas license plates, but the plate number wasn't recorded. Additionally, upon reviewing home videos recorded at the baseball field, investigators confirmed the existence of the suspect and the aforementioned red truck. However, unfortunately, the recordings were too grainy to provide a clear image of his face. Once Colleen reported Morgan's disappearance, she called her ex-husband and informed him of the situation. Morris seemed devastated by his daughter's disappearance and expressed willingness to cooperate with law enforcement. Surprisingly, during the initial investigation, the girl's father became a potential suspect as some evidence suggested he acted as a low-level drug dealer. He also reportedly had a criminal history, including assault and property damage charges. From the beginning of the investigation, Colleen was willing to cooperate with law enforcement in every way because her only wish was for her daughter to return safely. However, when investigators initially suspected Morris, her ex-husband, of being involved in Morgan's disappearance, she felt the police were making a grave mistake. She defended him, claiming he would never harm their children. Fortunately, the police soon ruled out Morris as a person of interest and focused their attention on Clifford Joe Pullen, rumored to be his drug supplier. This individual had a criminal record, and in addition to being arrested for marijuana possession, he had also been charged with first-degree rape of a minor in 1995, suggesting he might be capable of kidnapping. Nevertheless, authorities quickly cleared Clifford of any suspicion and stated he was not involved in Morgan's disappearance. Although the police received numerous leads at the time, none led to Morgan, and months, and then years went by. During this period, information from Albert Harvey, a resident of Stuttgart, Arkansas, seemed promising. He claimed he had seen a man fitting the suspect's description with a blonde child trying to enter his truck. Interestingly, Albert was able to identify the suspect from the sketch, and the police used all their resources to scour the area. However, as hours went by without any leads, law enforcement began to doubt his claims. They subjected Albert to 2 polygraph tests, which he failed, and he eventually admitted to lying. The case went cold, and as time passed, the search was no longer for his 6-year-old girl, so the existing photos of Morgan seemed insufficient. To provide a solution, in February 2001, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released an age-progressed photo showing what Morgan might look like at 12 years old. The intention behind such photographs was to widely disseminate an updated image of Morgan. This way, if someone spotted a teenager resembling the image, they could alert authorities to verify it if she was the girl abducted in 1995. Leads in the case were dwindling. Although police vowed that they wouldn't stop working the case until they found Morgan, the trail was growing cold. Searches would continue to be held sporadically, and detectives still followed up on every tip they received, but nothing brought them any closer to finding Morgan. The next lead came in January 2002, when a tip led investigators to search a property in Logan County, Arkansas. A witness claimed that Morgan was buried there. This testimony was so detailed and specific that the police acted on it. However, despite using search dogs and scouring the area thoroughly, nothing was found. On August 14, 2005, ABC's Extreme Makeover, Home Edition, and John Walsh, co-founder of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, addressed the topic of missing children, highlighting Morgan's abduction. Colin and Morgan's siblings received a new home after their family home was damaged by a water heater explosion. In November 2010, federal investigators searched a vacant house in Sparrow, Oklahoma, after receiving a tip from a confidential informant. Sparrow was about 25 miles from Alma, and the property they searched had once belonged to a convicted child molester who was currently in jail. Although investigators had nothing linking the man to Morgan's disappearance, they searched through the home looking for possible DNA evidence that might indicate Morgan had been there. Unfortunately, they didn't uncover anything related to the case. In August 2012, two convicts, identified as Tonya Smith and James Monhart, were accused of trying to buy some of Morgan's personal documents, including her social security number and birth certificate. While they were found guilty of document forgery, investigations determined they weren't involved in Morgan's disappearance. On December 18, 2017, police conducted another search on a property in Sparrow. Some reports said it was for an unrelated investigation, while others believed it was connected to Morgan's case. Notably, the search dogs signaled to a well on the property, which then became the focus of the search. After an intense 24-hour search, investigators left the property without finding any evidence. In November 2021, detectives identified Billy Jacklinks as a potential suspect in Morgan Mick's abduction. An Arkansas resident, Billy was a registered sex offender who had been in and out of prison since 1992. Reports suggest he had a typical upbringing, with no apparent signs of deviance. He served in the U.S. Army during World War and later worked for an airline in Dallas before returning to Arkansas. Despite seemingly staying out of trouble, he was arrested and charged with sexual offenses in 1992. 2 months after Morgan's 1995 disappearance, Billy attempted to kidnap an 11-year-old girl only 8 miles from where Morgan vanished. Witnesses reported he drove a red pickup truck, aligning with descriptions from Morgan's case. A week after Billy's arrest, investigators searched his truck, finding hair, fibers, a mash sheet, rope, a tarp, insulation tape, and blood on one of the seats. The samples were stored for future analysis, but it's unclear if they were tested then. Shortly after his arrest, Arkansas State Police and the FBI tried to question him about Morgan's case, but he invoked his right to an attorney and refused to talk. Regarding the 11-year-old he tried to kidnap, Billy proclaimed his innocence, but he was convicted of sexual solicitation and sentenced to 6 years in prison in 1995. Billy remained behind bars until his sudden illness and death on August 5, 2000. In 2021, a news channel aired a documentary titled "Still Missing Morgan." Arkansas police mentioned they were still seeking information about the red truck with an attached white cabin. The documentary led to over 200 new tips, but none have resolved the case. The revelation about Billy Jacklinks was the last major update, but Morgan's disappearance remains an active investigation, with the police continuously receiving tips. Meanwhile, Colleen pleads with law enforcement to follow every lead, refusing to rest until his daughter is found, hoping for her safe return. This case has profoundly impacted Arkansas and even influenced the naming of the Amber Alert. The Amber Alert system began in 1996 after the disappearance of Amber Haterman in Arlington, Texas. Amber is an acronym for America's Missing, Broadcast Emergency Response, managed under the Department of Justice. The Morgan Nick Amber Alert is Arkansas's name for the program designed to alert the public when a child goes missing. This program is a joint effort between local law enforcement, media outlets, and civic groups to raise awareness about potential abductions, thereby increasing the chances of locating the missing child. Activating the Morgan Nick Alert involves the participation of all Arkansas law enforcement agencies, along with more than 250 local radio stations, TV networks, and other media outlets. This information is quickly disseminated to all parties, enabling them to broadcast details about a possible abduction widely. As of 2023, the case remains unsolved. Since Morgan's disappearance in 1995, her father, Morris, has opted for privacy, preferring not to discuss his daughter's case publicly. In contrast, Morgan's mother, Colleen, is vocal about her ongoing efforts to bring Morgan home. Colleen lives in Alma, Arkansas, where she runs the Morgan Mick Foundation, assisting families dealing with abductions or missing persons. Beyond advocating for these families, Colleen spreads awareness about daily dangers faced by children and offers detailed resources to help parents and teachers understand online safety basics and parental control apps. Despite extensive investigations that have yielded thousands of leads, there is still no concrete information on Morgan's whereabouts. The FBI and local communities have offered a reward of $60,000 for information leading to the recovery of Morgan Nick and the identification, arrest, and conviction of those responsible for her kidnapping. Maria Elizabeth Ridulph was a 7-year-old girl who disappeared from Sycamore, Illinois on December 3, 1957. Her remains were found almost 5 months later in a wooded area near Woodbine, Illinois, approximately 90 miles from her home. Maria was last seen by her friend on her neighborhood corner of Center Cross Street and Archie Place with an unknown man in his early 20s who called himself Johnny. Maria Ridulph was born on March 12, 1950, to the marriage of Michael and Frances Ivy Ridulph in Sycamore, Illinois. She was the youngest of their 4 children and had 2 sisters and a brother. While many residents lived or worked on farms in the area, her father Michael worked in one of Sycamore's Hue factories, and her mother Frances was a homemaker. At the time of her abduction, Maria was 7 years old, 1.10 meters tall, and weighed 24 kilograms, with dark brown hair and brown eyes. She was an honor student, then in the 2nd grade, and had also received awards for perfect attendance at Sunday school at John's Evangelical Lutheran Church. Maria was also described as sensitive and afraid of the dark. Her best friend was 8-year-old Kathy Sigmund, who lived on the same street as the Ridulphs. On the afternoon of December 3, 1957, Maria begged to be let out to play because it had started to snow. After dinner, Maria and her friend and neighbor Kathy Sigmund went out in the growing darkness as the sun had set, near Maria's house. They played a game they called dodging cars, running back and forth trying to avoid the lights of oncoming cars. According to Kathy, after a while, a man approached them, whom Kathy later described to the police as being around 20 years old and tall, with a thin chin, light hair, separated incisors, and wearing a colorful sweater. The man, who said his name was Johnny, asked the girls if they liked dolls and if they liked piggyback rides. He gave Maria a piggyback ride, after which she returned home and came back with one of her dolls to show him. After Maria went back, Kathy ran home to get her mittens, leaving Maria alone with the man. When Kathy returned, Maria and the man were no longer there. Kathy went to the Ridulph's house to tell them she couldn't find her friend. Initially, the family thought Maria was hiding and sent Maria's 11-year-old brother to look for her. After he couldn't find her, the Ridulphs called the police, and within an hour, both police and armed civilians began a search in the town, but they couldn't locate Maria or Johnny, the man she was last seen with. The FBI, assuming that Maria might have been kidnapped across state lines, a federal crime, arrived in Sycamore within 2 days to assist local and state police in the search. The FBI and police interviewed numerous witnesses who had seen the 2 girls playing without anyone else present between 6:00 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. Based on these interviews, it was believed that Johnny had approached the girls after 6:30 p.m., and the FBI concluded that Maria was kidnapped between 6:45 and 7:00 p.m. Maria's disappearance received national media coverage, and both President Eisenhower and FBI Director John Edgar Hoover took an interest in the case. The police continued to investigate various suspects in the area, including passersby, known sex offenders, and a local man who had given children piggyback rides. But they didn't develop any solid leads. Maria's parents appeared on television, radio, and in the press, pleading for the safe return of their daughter and seeking the public's help in finding her. On April 26, 1958, near Woodbine, Illinois, approximately 100 miles from Sycamore, two tourists looking for mushrooms in a wooded area along U.S. Route 20 discovered the skeletal remains of a child wearing only an undershirt, shirt, and socks beneath a partially fallen tree. The state of decomposition indicated that the body had been there for several months. The body was identified as Maria Ridulph through dental records, a lock of hair, and the clothing she had been wearing when she disappeared. Her coat, corduroy pants, underwear, and shoes were not found. There were no photographs taken at the crime scene, though photographs were taken of the general location without showing the body, because the coroner, James Furlong, did not want pictures of the remains to leak to the newspapers. Due to the crime having occurred within Illinois rather than crossing state lines, the FBI withdrew from the case and left it in the hands of state and local police. The initial autopsy could not determine the cause of death due to the advanced state of decomposition. On December 4th, investigators visited John Tessier's house as part of the search for Maria in the neighborhood. According to Tessier's stepsisters, their mother told the investigators that John Tessier had been home on the night of December 3rd, something they later testified was not true. Shortly thereafter, before Maria's body was found, the FBI investigated Tessier as a possible suspect. Sources differ on whether the investigation was triggered by a comment from a local resident or by John Tessier's parents themselves, trying to divert suspicion from their son when they realized he had the same name and general description as Johnny. Tessier and his parents told FBI investigators that on December 3, 1957, Tessier was in Rockford, Illinois, about 40 miles northwest of Sycamore, to enlist in the Air Force. This story differed from his mother's earlier statement, as reported by her daughters, that Tessier had been at home all night. He said he had been in Chicago on December 2nd and 3rd undergoing the required physical exams for his enlistment. On the morning of December 3rd, he visited the Chicago recruiting office, which was corroborated by records, and then spent the day sightseeing in Chicago before returning to Rockford by train that evening, arriving there at 6:45 p.m. Upon arriving in Rockford, he called his parents to ask them to pick him up and take him home to Sycamore since he had taken the train to and from Chicago and had left his own car at home. Later, telephone records were found showing that a collect call had been made from the Rockford post office to the Tessier home at 6:57 p.m. that evening by someone who gave their name as John Tessier, as written by the operator. After making the call, Tessier met with officials at the Rockford recruiting office to drop off paperwork related to his enlistment. Officers confirmed that they spoke with Tessier around 7:15 p.m. that evening, although one officer also expressed some concerns about Tessier's credibility and behavior. Tessier was taken to the police station to take a lie detector test, which he passed. Based on his alibi and the lie detector test results, Tessier was removed from the list of suspects, and the FBI closed their report on December 10, 1957. In 1997, with no significant leads, Sycamore Police Lieutenant Patrick Soler closed the Ridulph case, which was 40 years old at the time, and named William Henry Redmond, a former truck driver and carnival worker from Nebraska who had died in 1992, as the likely man who had abducted and murdered the girl. Redmond had been accused in 1988 of the 1951 murder of an 8-year-old Pennsylvania girl, although that case was dismissed when a police officer refused to reveal the name of a confidential informant. Redmond was also a suspect in the 1951 disappearance of 10-year-old Beverly Potts in Ohio. The case was reopened in 2008 based on new information from McCullough's half-sister, Janet Tessier. According to Janet, her mother, Eileen Tessier, on her death in January 1994, had said, "John did it. John did it. Those two girls and the one who disappeared. You have to tell someone." Janet interpreted the statement to mean that her half-brother John Tessier, who would soon change his name to Jack McCullough, had kidnapped and killed Maria Ridulph. John, or Jack McCullough, as he was known at that time, allegedly once threatened to kill Janet with a gun and sexually abused his half-sister Jean when she was 14. He was separated from the Tessier family at the time of his mother Eileen's death, and he was told not to attend her funeral. Janet Tessier said that she made several unsuccessful attempts over the next 14 years to get law enforcement, including the Sycamore Police and the FBI, to investigate her mother's statement. State police investigators reviewed the evidence and developed a new timeline in which Tessier could have kidnapped Maria and driven to Rockford in time to make a phone call at 6:57 p.m. and meet with the recruiting officers at 7:15 p.m. Under this new timeline, they determined that Maria would have been kidnapped no later than 6:20 p.m. The police search for Maria had started at 7 p.m. according to Catherine, who said she had returned home from a party at 7 p.m. and found the search had begun. Hoping that Kathy Chapman, formerly Sigmund, would review a series of yearbook photographs, the police took 5 group photos from the Sycamore High School yearbook of 1957. But John Tessier's photo was not in the yearbook because he had been expelled. The police obtained a contemporary photo of him from his ex-girlfriend, which differed from the yearbook photos in that Tessier was wearing a shirt instead of a suit, and the background was dark instead of light. Chapman identified Tessier's photo. Along with the picture, Tessier's former girlfriend at the time of the crime provided an unused military train ticket from Rockford to Chicago dated December 1957. Investigators took this to suggest that, contrary to Tessier's alibi, he did not take the train on his trip to Chicago and instead drove there, which means he could have returned to Sycamore on the afternoon of December 3, kidnapped Maria, and driven to Rockford. In July 2011, the Seattle Police Department, which had joined the Illinois State Police in the investigation, brought McCullough in for questioning. At first, McCullough spoke calmly and cooperated, but when asked about the murder of Maria Ridulph and his whereabouts on the night of the crime, he became evasive and aggressive. After McCullough refused to answer more questions, he was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridulph and extradited to Illinois. Maria's body was exhumed that same month to look for evidence of possible intruder DNA, but none could be found. However, a forensic anthropologist discovered that Maria had been stabbed in the throat at least 3 times with a sharp object. The news of the arrest in a 54-year-old murder case garnered national attention. In the September 2012 trial, the prosecution argued that McCullough was attracted to Maria and decided to kidnap her, but ended up taking her life. They presented new autopsy reports suggesting that Maria had been fatally wounded. 3 inmates who had been incarcerated with McCullough testified that he had talked about killing Maria. However, their stories were inconsistent. One inmate said McCullough talked about strangling Maria with a wire, while another claimed McCullough accidentally suffocated her while trying to prevent her from screaming. The defense argued that the prosecutors and police were pressured by the Ridulph and Tessier families to solve the case and implicate McCullough, even though there was no physical evidence, motive, or indication that McCullough was in the area when Maria was kidnapped. McCullough did not take the stand in his own defense, following his lawyer's advice. On September 14, 2012, McCullough was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Maria Ridulph and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. He was 73 years old at the time of the sentencing. In 2015, McCullough, acting pro se, representing himself, filed a post-conviction petition seeking to overturn his murder conviction. After the court initially dismissed McCullough's petition as frivolous and without merit, the public defender who had originally represented McCullough at trial and had continued to investigate the case while staying in contact with McCullough, despite no longer being appointed to represent him, asked the court to reconsider the dismissal. In response to the motions, the county's state prosecutor, Richard Schmack, who had replaced Clay Campbell in that position, conducted a thorough review of the evidence. This led Schmack to conclude that McCullough could not have committed the crime and was, in fact, innocent. According to Schmack, there was no evidence presented at the trial that clearly established McCullough's whereabouts on the night of Maria Ridulph's abduction and supported his alibi. In particular, Illinois Bell telephone records showed that McCullough had made a collect call to his mother that night from a payphone in downtown Rockford, rather than from Sycamore, as alleged in his trial. Given the timing of the phone call, the approximately 40-mile distance between Sycamore and Rockford, and the icy road conditions, Schmack concluded that McCullough could not have been in Sycamore at the time of Maria Ridulph's disappearance. On April 15, 2016, an Illinois Circuit Court judge overturned McCullough's original conviction and sentence and ordered a new trial. McCullough, who still faced charges, was released on bail that day pending the new trial. McCullough was declared innocent of the crime by the DeKalb County Circuit Court on April 12, 2017. Sarah Nicole Graham, born on April 1, 1996 in the United States, remains a subject shrouded in mystery as specific details of her birth and early life remain undisclosed. Sarah's upbringing was under the care of her mother in Texas, sharing a joyful childhood with her brother, though their names are absent in the records detailing Sarah's life. Described as a sweet, responsible, and initially shy girl when meeting new individuals, Sarah's spontaneous and lively nature would shine through once she became comfortable. From the information gathered, we learned about her father, Hubert Graham, a direct descendant of the indigenous people of America. This lineage connected Sarah to the Lumbee tribe, predominantly situated in the counties of Robeson, Hoke, and Scotland in North Carolina. The Lumbee tribe emerged from the remnants of extinct tribes, grouping in a recognized area since 1956, when Congress passed the Lumbee Act, officially recognizing them as Native Americans. However, the act also withheld federal recognition benefits, denying them sovereignty, land rights, and other advantages afforded to different tribes. Despite generations of fighting against this discrimination, they remain without a reservation, though they do congregate in a specific area. Pembroke, located in Robeson County, North Carolina, serves as the cultural, economic, and political hub for the Lumbee tribe. Sarah journeyed there in 2014 after finishing high school, possibly aiming to connect with her genealogical roots. At 18, she aspired to relocate to Fairmont, a quaint rural town north of the North Carolina-South Carolina border, to live with her father, Hubert, her stepmother, Connie Graham, and a stepbrother, though details about him remained elusive. By then, Hubert and Connie held positions as assistants to the sheriff of the county, earning them respect within the community. While little is publicly known about Sarah's relationship with her father and stepmother, all signs pointed to her enjoying the newfound connection with her ancestral culture, having grown up in a different state. Upon settling in Fairmont, Sarah eagerly sought employment, quickly landing a job as a receptionist and cashier at Walmart in Pembroke. Her excellent communication skills and friendly demeanor quickly made her an indispensable team member. Sarah was a responsible and kind-hearted young woman, popular among her colleagues, and was beginning to form friendships. In just 2 months of reconnecting with her ethnic roots, Sarah was thriving and genuinely happy. However, on the morning of Wednesday, February 4, 2015, something changed. Although she woke up early and prepared for her 7 a.m. work shift at Walmart, she never arrived. Her supervisor immediately noticed her absence, given her previously consistent punctuality and commitment. That very day, the white Chevrolet van, loaned to her by her father and under his name, was found abandoned. At around 12:15 p.m., police received reports of a seemingly deserted vehicle located several meters from the road, near a cornfield, marking the beginning of a concerning mystery. When the officers approached the area, they were able to confirm that it was indeed the van Sarah usually drove. It was already quite strange that it was parked there, seemingly abandoned, and without the young girl in sight. The situation became even murkier when witnesses claimed they had seen the vehicle parked there since 6:45 a.m. This statement set off alarms, as it meant that the van had stopped there just 15 minutes after Sarah had left her house. It was a puzzle that no one could decipher at that moment. The officers inspected the vehicle and the surrounding area for any clues or traces that could guide the investigation into Sarah's whereabouts. However, the task proved difficult. There was no damage to the van, no signs of a struggle around it, and no tracks of shoe prints being dragged on the ground, which could have indicated an abduction. A mysterious aspect of the case revolved around the fact that the van was locked. Speculations were made that someone must have manually locked the door with the car key. However, many older vehicles, like the one Sarah was using, allow the driver to manually lock the doors and close them without using the key. In many cases, cars get locked by accident. With the discovery of the abandoned van, the Fairmont Police Department activated the missing person search protocol. Along with police officers, 140 local volunteers and a canine unit participated. However, there were challenges, the first being that Robeson County is the largest in North Carolina, making the search extensive and primarily in a rural area. As a result, the search was not easy, and even a helicopter had to be used. Concurrently, the process of printing missing person flyers began. Sarah was described on the flyers as a Native American young woman, 5'7" tall, weighing 150 pounds, with short brown hair, wearing corrective glasses and braces. Robeson County has just over 100,000 permanent residents, though it is known to temporarily house many migrant workers. The area also has a rather negative reputation, being known for significant drug trafficking activity. This is due to its strategic location, situated halfway between Miami, Florida, and New York on Interstate 95, making it a popular stop for traffickers. Amidst this scenario, with many people coming and going without proper records or tracking, figuring out what happened to the young girls seemed like a Herculean task. Local and state officials joined the search, but without significant results. A month later, FBI agents joined the search, yet they too were unable to find any trace of Sarah. Her family had no contact with her, nor did they receive ransom demands or any communication from supposed kidnappers asking for favors in exchange for her safe return. The general consensus in the town was that she had vanished into thin air. On March 18, 6 months after Sarah's disappearance, Connie, her stepmother, was dismissed from her position as an assistant at the sheriff's office. She had worked there for 23 years, and her sudden dismissal raised eyebrows and fueled suspicion and rumors. The sheriff announced the news but refused to provide further details, labeling it a personal decision. He also stated that the dismissal was not related to Sarah's disappearance, though this did little to quell public suspicions. In a statement, he also expressed understanding of the public's eagerness for information, but requested patience, stating that releasing specific case details could jeopardize the integrity of the investigation and hinder efforts to find Sarah. He assured that the Robeson County Sheriff's Office detectives, in collaboration with the FBI, were working tirelessly on the case and vowed not to stop until Sarah was found. After Connie's dismissal was made public, sources close to the investigation said that the FBI considered Connie a suspect in the case, adding that an arrest and charges could be forthcoming. Once this information was disseminated, all eyes turned to the Graham residence. However, as time passed, the hypothesis that the stepmother was involved in Sarah's disappearance was never proven. In fact, she was not arrested for questioning, nor were charges brought against her, and she was never named a person of interest. Despite this, public opinion on social media at the time and over the years has consistently suggested that she might be involved. While there hasn't been any official statement, rumors suggested that Connie's son and Sarah's stepbrother was a problematic boy, and that he was responsible for the young girl's disappearance. The rumors spread on social media talked about a romantic interest bordering on obsession from the stepbrother, to which Sarah never responded. On the contrary, she seemed annoyed by his persistence. A year after Sarah's disappearance, There was very little information available about her case. It seemed as if the earth had swallowed her up. On the first anniversary, FBI agents and local officers conducted an operation where they distributed flyers with Sarah's details and images to drivers passing through the area where the teenager's van was found. At that time, the officers insisted that although they had little information about the young girl, who had only been living in the place for 2 months when she disappeared, it was clear that her disappearance was not usual. They stated that she would not have left without notice, and if she had, she would have contacted her parents to at least inform them that she was well and in another place. In December 2018, human remains were found near the railroad tracks about 3 kilometers from the lumber bridge in Riley County. Later, it was determined that they belonged to a female, and immediately, people thought it could be Sarah. On December 13, 2018, it was announced that Sarah's dental records were sent to Riley County to see if there was a match with the young girl. A second set of dental records was sent to the office of the forensic chief medical officer in Riley. However, it was later confirmed that it was not Sarah. In 2022, the Federal Bureau of Investigation made another appeal asking for information to find the teenager, stating that although they had received hundreds of clues, they still needed that missing piece to bring Sarah home. The agent reminded that there is a $5,000 reward for information that leads to finding Sarah's whereabouts. After the video was published, the young girl's father broke the silence he had maintained for years. He expressed his feelings about how the agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, treated him in the case of his daughter Sarah's disappearance. At the time of his statement, he served as chief of the Roland Police Department and mentioned that despite holding that position, he needed to be treated as a father, as Sarah was still his daughter regardless of the circumstances. It is worth remembering that previously, Hubert had worked as a deputy sheriff of another county when his daughter disappeared, and this somehow led to him being viewed very critically and always being under suspicion. Hurt by the whole situation that kept him always in the public eye, despite there being no real evidence against him, Hubert said that over the years, the FBI had barely contacted him in relation to Sarah, and he recalled a call in which they asked him about his daughter's orthodontics due to the finding of some human remains, which ultimately turned out not to be Sarah's, but no one informed him of the results. He found out like any other citizen when the media published the outcome of the investigation of the female remains found near the train. The truth was, in the investigators' opinion, there was someone close to Sarah who was not revealing all the information they had, and this had given rise to numerous rumors and speculations about what had happened. Hubert expressed his deep concern about not knowing anything about his daughter's whereabouts after she came to live with him and his wife 2 months before disappearing. Despite the difficult situation, he maintained hope that Sarah was alive and stated that no one had provided him with solid evidence to indicate otherwise. He clarified that he was not an indifferent father to what had happened and offered his arguments for keeping a low profile. He said that although he had experience as a detective due to his 23 years in law enforcement, he preferred to stay away from the investigation to avoid any perception of influence or interference in the process. However, that didn't seem to work out quite well either, as he then received criticism for being lenient and not offering cooperation. He pointed out that his position was quite difficult, as whether he did or did not do something generated abundant criticism. To the father's statement, the FBI responded in a very institutional way. Through a public affairs specialist, they responded to Hubert's concerns about routine contact in relation to Sarah's case and explained that they had always spoken with the family when there were updates in the investigation, but they would not necessarily make a personal notification for already known information. Despite the pain and uncertainty, Sarah's father shared that there came a point where he had to surrender to God's will and not let worries dominate his life. He affirmed that ultimately God knew best and would handle the situation according to his will, regardless of what the final outcome was. On June 13, 2023, special agents and officers from Robson County conducted a search at the Gran family's home looking for new clues about Sarah's disappearance. The sheriff's office stated at that time that they were doubting the version given by the father and stepmother about the day the young girl was last seen. The statement from the sheriff's office indicated that they had not been able to independently confirm the family's version that Sarah left for work the day she disappeared, which occurred more than 8 years ago. Now, after such a long time has passed since her last sighting, Sarah's case is being reviewed again. In a Facebook post, the sheriff's office confirmed that homicide detectives, the FBI, and a tracker dog from the North Carolina Troopers Association had started a search, although no details were provided about the location where it was taking place. According to the authorities, Sarah is one of several Native American women who have mysteriously disappeared in the same area in recent years. During the summer of 2017, it was reported that 3 women, 2 of them belonging to the North Carolina tribe, were found dead in the city of Lumberton in Robeson County. The cases have not been solved, which has raised fears of the existence of a possible serial killer, according to a news report. Despite this concerning situation, the sheriff's office did not mention any possible connection between these cases and Sarah's disappearance in their statement. The case of Sarah Nicole Graham remains a mystery, leaving her family and community seeking answers for over 8 years. Over time, authorities have conducted thorough investigations and searches, but to this date, there has been no significant breakthrough in the case of Sarah Nicole Graham. The lack of concrete information has led to various theories and speculation, while Sarah's family continues to wait anxiously for the day they can find answers about her whereabouts. Despite the efforts of the authorities, the community's cooperation, and the leads received, Sarah's case remains an unsolved puzzle. Her family continues to cry out for justice and longs for the day when the truth about her disappearance is unveiled. Meanwhile, the memory of Sarah endures in the minds of those who knew and loved her, and the hope of finding her alive persists. As the investigation continues, it is hoped that new leads and developments will shed light on this dark and painful episode, bringing the long-awaited peace and closure to her family and the community. Ruth Penelope Penny Bell, known to most as Penny, was born on February 28, 1948, in Somerset, England. Her childhood was a mix of highs and lows. As a teenager, family problems intensified, leading 16-year-old Penny to leave home to start a new life. Despite her young age and lack of resources, she managed to forge ahead, buoyed by her energetic and friendly personality. Eventually, Penny married, and at the age of 30, in 1978, she gave birth to a son named Matthew. Details about her early adult life are sparse, including information about her first marriage, which was relatively short. In 1981, Penny married Alistair Bell, a successful real estate agent. They had been friends before their marriage, and Alistair readily accepted Matthew, raising him as his own son. To outsiders, they appeared to be a stable and prosperous couple. In 1982, Penny and Alistair welcomed their daughter, Lauren, Penny's second child, and the first from her marriage with Bell. The family seemed to be thriving, settling into a comfortable home. The Bells' finances improved significantly, and in October 1987, they moved with their 2 children to a house valued at £500,000, approximately $626,000, in Baker's Wood, in Buckinghamshire, an area regarded as a haven for celebrities at the time. Their life seemed idyllic, with a harmonious home free of any obvious strife. They enjoyed the privileges and comforts their financial situation afforded them. By the early 1990s, Penny had established herself as a successful businesswoman. She was highly organized, managing her busy schedule meticulously. Alistair also did well professionally, and though their family home was comfortably equipped, in the summer of 1991, the Bells hired a renovation team to refresh their home's aesthetics. They could easily afford the renovation expenses, Little did they know that their seemingly perfect world was about to collapse, and a tragic event would soon expose family secrets that no one could have imagined. June 6, 1991, began like any other day for the Bells. Alistair left the house at 8:30 a.m., as usual, to drop his son at school before heading to work. He bid farewell to his wife, who appeared radiant and cheerful as always. The night before, Alistair had noticed Penny seemed worried, but she assured him she was just exhausted. Alistair believed her as she fell asleep quickly. He thought the stress of the home renovations was taking a toll on her energy. As Alistair left with his son in the car, he noticed Penny didn't give her usual hand-wave goodbye, but he attributed this to her being preoccupied with many things, including the disruptions caused by the renovation work. Later that morning, around 9:40 a.m., Penny left her home and got into her Arctic Blue Jaguar XJS. Before departing, she briefly spoke with the workers renovating her property, informing them she was in a hurry due to an appointment at 9:50 a.m. Strangely, Penny hadn't mentioned this commitment to her husband, nor had she recorded it in her diary or any other documents. She left hastily for this mysterious meeting. The morning proceeded as usual until, later that day around noon, a shocking discovery of the parking lot of the Gurnell Leisure Centre in Greenford, London, forever changed the course of events. A passerby reported to the police the sight of a woman's bloody body inside a parked car. The vehicle was identified as a blue Jaguar. Responding officers immediately noticed multiple stab wounds on the victim's body. Inside the car were the woman's belongings, quickly identifying her as 43-year-old Ruth Penelope Penny Bell. As the investigation began, her body was sent to the coroner's office, where it was determined she had been stabbed approximately 50 times in the chest and arms in what police described as a frenzied attack. Within the crime scene, the central console of the vehicle contained samples of wallpaper intended for the Bells' bedroom. Investigators found it peculiar that Penny had received these samples 15 days earlier, yet she had never shown them to her family. It appeared Penny might have been showing the wallpaper to someone in the car, or perhaps this person intentionally placed them there to stage the scene and mislead investigators. The only person Penny had discussed the wallpaper with was the interior decorator working at her home. That morning, she mentioned seeking the second opinion about the color, which is why she had them with her. Forensic investigations revealed more details about the brutal attack. It was determined that the assailant had stabbed Penny from the passenger seat, then exited the vehicle and attacked her again from the driver's window. Despite the implications, no one witnessed the attack. Police tried to reconstruct Penny's last movements that day and discovered that on June 3, 1991, 3 days before her murder, she had withdrawn £8,500, about $10,600, in cash from the joint bank account she shared with her husband. The purpose of this large cash withdrawal was unknown, especially since she had never withdrawn such a significant sum before. The police believed Penny had this money when she died, but it was not found in the car. Although robbery could be considered a motive, Penny's purse and wallet were still in the vehicle, making it strange for a thief to attack the victim so viciously. On June 8, 1991, the police held a press conference where it was reported that the parking lot of Gurnell Leisure Centre was very crowded at the time of the crime. The lot had 153 spaces and was almost full. However, the killer had an advantage. Penny's car was parked in front of a natural hedge barrier, obstructing the view from the front. This location might have been chosen by the killer for its potential to attack and escape unnoticed. Investigators believed the murderer would have been heavily blood-stained after the merciless attack, and it was likely that someone had seen them, as it would have been difficult to go unnoticed. Police requested the community's help, asking anyone who observed anything unusual to come forward. However, no witnesses reported seeing anyone covered in blood near the crime scene. Witnesses did, however, report sightings of Penny on the morning of her death. Around 9:45 a.m., a woman walking her dog near Penny's home saw a man in a brown or bronze car waiting on the side of the road. She stated that a blue Jaguar pulled up next to the car, and a man got into the passenger seat. Penny's blue Jaguar was quite distinctive, making it highly likely that it was her. The man was described as around 40 years old, of medium build, wearing a light shirt and dark trousers. Penny's usual route to the office was via the A40. A truck driver reported seeing the car matching the Jaguar's description in Greenford just before 10:30 a.m. He noticed the car was moving very slowly and had a passenger in the front seat. The driver seemed to be trying to park, but the passenger kept correcting the direction, steering the car back onto the road. As the witness passed the car, he saw the man's hand on the wheel and noticed a gold chain on his right wrist. Several other witnesses reported seeing the same blue car with its hazard lights on, moving very slowly and occasionally veering into the opposite lane. Despite these observations, no one paid much attention or stopped to see if the driver needed help. Others claimed to have seen Penny's car in the Gurnell Ledger Center parking lot. However, the car was strategically parked near a hedge, limiting visibility from the front. A woman walking through the parking lot noticed the windshield wipers moving on a dry, sunny day and the hazard lights flashing, but she did not look inside the car. These sightings in the public pool parking lot happened less than an hour after Penny left her house. Another witness saw the blue Jaguar with a dark-haired man in the passenger seat. He watched the car enter the parking lot and saw the driver, presumably Penny, look at him and silently mouth a plea for help, though he heard nothing. Despite this, he ignored the call for help and continued on his way. Around 10:45 a.m., a witness saw a man leaving the swimming pool parking lot on foot. He was described as elegantly dressed and not carrying the swim bag, suggesting he wasn't there to swim. It was noted that one side of his face appeared disfigured. Penny had been stabbed multiple times, but the witness did not see any blood on the man's clothes. Similarly, a driver reported seeing a car speeding along Greenford Road. She said she pulled in front of it, thinking there was enough time, but the car quickly closed the distance due to its high speed. The driver signaled with his lights and shouted for her to move aside. Initially, she didn't let him pass but became frightened and stopped. The police were perplexed by these testimonies and the general indifference of those who noticed something amiss but did nothing. Investigators firmly believed that Penny knew her killer. During their examination, they found fingerprints in Penny's car belonging to a man named John Richmond, a former neighbor of Penny and Alistair in Whitmore Road in Harrow, before the family moved in 1987. John, who had a criminal record for forgery and smuggling, was arrested in April 1992 and held in police custody until July 1992. He was eventually released after the police decided not to press charges. In December 1994, John contacted the Daily Sun newspaper, claiming he was the person Penny had planned to meet on the morning of her murder, but that they had parted ways before she was killed. He also claimed her death was a contract killing and that he knew the perpetrator. He offered to reveal the name in exchange for £80,000, about $100,000. However, authorities suspected this was an attempt to recoup losses from a recent bankruptcy. Instead of paying John for the information, the Daily Sun contacted the police. Without anything to corroborate his claims or conclusively link him to Penny's murder, the police assumed his statements were false and driven by financial interest, and no charges were brought against him. Alistair, Penny's husband, was also considered a suspect, being the primary beneficiary of his wife's estate and life insurance. However, there was no evidence linking him to the murder, and he had a solid alibi confirmed by coworkers. Media speculation also arose about Alistair's homosexual affair, suggesting his lover might have killed Penny out of jealousy. Penny was aware of her husband's bisexuality. When they met, Alistair was in a relationship with another man, who even participated in their wedding ceremony. Police rigorously questioned Alistair about this, but later ruled him out as a suspect. It was also revealed that until 1982, when daughter Lauren was born, Penny had volunteered at Samaritans, a charity offering emotional support to people dealing with issues like anxiety, distress, and suicidal thoughts. The police considered the possibility that Penny might have acted as a counselor to someone mentally unstable, leading to the murder. However, this theory did not hold up. The investigation concluded it was very likely Penny knew her killer, but establishing a motive proved challenging. The robbery theory didn't fit the scene, though the whereabouts of the money she withdrew the day before remained unknown. There was no evidence of sexual assault, yet the frenzied nature of the attack suggested a personal motive. In 1993, John Bradley, a former royal stewardess, was similarly murdered with a knife as she got into her BMW in East London. Newspapers nationwide quickly reported the similarities between the two murders. Both victims were successful business executives in their 40s and died within 5 kilometers of each other. Like in Penny's case, Jean was not sexually assaulted, and her purse remained intact in her car. A witness saw the suspected murderer fleeing the scene and chased him, but lost him in an underground parking lot. Blood and DNA traces found at the crime scene did not match Jen. However, investigators could not link the samples to anyone and found no connection between the two murders. To this day, the murder of Jen Bradley remains unsolved. Following the failed attempt to link Penny's case with Jean's, the police resumed their investigation. They considered convicted murderer Robert Napper as a suspect but ultimately ruled him out. The officers later announced that up to 30 people who might have been in the parking lot at the time of the businesswoman's murder had not yet come forward to report if they saw anything on the morning of June 6, 1991. Alistair Bell made a public plea for witnesses, but it was in vain. During the investigation, over 8,000 people were interviewed, and more than 2,500 written statements were recorded. Although Michael Flynn, a business associate of Alistair and Penny, offered a reward of £20,000, approximately $25,000, for evidence leading to a conviction, the case grew cold. The tragedy of Penny Bell's murder didn't end in June 1991. 10 years later, when Lauren was 19, her father Alistair told her he no longer had the capacity to love and asked her to leave the family home. Her older brother, Matthew, had left for boarding school a few years earlier. Over the years, Lauren has given several interviews, expressing that everything in her family seemed to break apart from the moment her mother died. She described her mother as the glue that held everyone close, and since her passing, friends and family drifted apart, which she found deeply saddening. Lauren remarked that contrary to the belief that families come together in the wake of tragedy, her family experienced the opposite. She lamented that while similar cases often see families holding candlelight vigils and trying to love each other more, the Bells mourned differently. She said that since 1992, her father has been a prisoner of his own grief, no longer seeing or speaking to anyone and still living in the family home. Lauren noted that the lack of maintenance on the grounds of their once imposing property made it appear abandoned. In 2022, Lauren, now a mother herself, gave an interview. She revealed that she had become a detective in an attempt to solve the mystery of what happened to Penny. She enlisted the support of former Metropolitan Police Detective Brian Edwards, who led the initial investigation into the murder and retired in 1999. The two teamed up since 2021, marking 30 years since Penny's murder, and are determined to solve the mystery surrounding the horrendous crime. Lauren announced they would offer a reward of €20,000 for any information that could help identify the perpetrator and bring them to justice. Retired Detective Edwards stated to the same media outlet that Penny's case had always troubled him, and when Lauren contacted him, he did not hesitate to get involved again. Together, they are scrutinizing every detail of Penny's life to find new evidence, hopeful they will uncover the culprit and, with police support, bring the killer to justice. More than 2 decades after Penny Bell's bloody body was found in her distinctive blue Jaguar, the case remains one of the most enduring and enigmatic unsolved crimes in the United Kingdom during the 20th century. Agustina Halbert was born on March 23, 1991, in the province of Buenos Aires, Argentina. She belonged to a well-known family and was the eldest of three daughters of the couple Carolina and Edgardo Halbert, who served as the Secretary of Health of their city. Her uncle, Hermann Halbert, held the position of tourism minister and was a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro region. Consequently, the Halbert family was widely recognized in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who knew Agustina since her childhood consistently praised her outstanding qualities. She was described as a sensitive, sincere, and loving child who had a passion for dogs and excelled in design, crafts, and decoration. Helen, who shared her adolescence with Agustina, observed her creative talent from a very young age. Helen recalled that when they were in school together, each class was assigned a theme, and Agustina always took the lead in decorating the classroom entrance with her impressive drawings and giant models. While her classmates were cutting and pasting, they followed Agustina's lead because they knew she was steps ahead, creating incredible models. Agustina also had a strong interest in fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school class. Those close to her affectionately called her Agos and described her as sociable and an excellent hostess. She loved dressing up, and during her teenage years, her friends often gathered in the garage of her house for pre-dance parties. She would try to introduce her different groups of friends to each other, always striving to connect people. Agustina enjoyed baking and cooking, and she was skilled at it. She had a keen sense of taste and excelled in many things. She had a curious nature, and when something piqued her interest, she pursued it. After completing her secondary education, she initially enrolled in architecture, but later abandoned it. During that time, she focused her energy on fashion design and studied it for a while, but she ultimately changed her direction. Nevertheless, she was a successful young woman who used her knowledge to chase her dreams. She even started her own clothing brand, worked as a model, and was building her career. At some point in her adult life, Agustina's path crossed with Juan Manuel Rivera, with whom she began a relationship that seemed to be going well. Little is known about Juan Manuel's life, and even the names of his parents have not been disclosed. Only a text from an acquaintance referred to them as Moni and Mauricio, and other family details remain unknown. The only accessible information about Juan Manuel is his LinkedIn profile, where he is promoted as a software engineer, a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina, although his listed place of residence was Toronto and its surroundings in Canada. Interestingly, a search in the university did not reveal him as a graduate. Instead, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had not passed two subjects during the periods of 2008 and 2009, which led to him losing his status as a regular student in the field of information systems engineering. Agustina and Juan Manuel's relationship began during the pandemic and was characterized by ups and downs. According to some of her family members, he exhibited psychological violence towards her and was controlling. However, the situation escalated in the summer of 2021, marked by more serious conflicts and violence perpetrated by Juan Manuel against Agustina. Her father shared that she was deeply affected by the relationship, but with the support of her family, she rebuilt her life and had no contact with him for a whole year. Around September 2022, Agustina decided to move to Mexico, specifically to the picturesque beach town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to further her modeling career. She rented an apartment, leaving behind her comfort zone in her native Argentina and putting a considerable distance between herself and Juan Manuel. In Mexico, Agustina lived by doing advertising appearances as a hostess and engaging in modeling activities. She aspired to travel the world while pursuing her modeling career. She loved Playa del Carmen and was genuinely happy there. She found work quickly and was thriving. She had many friendships and the support of a childhood friend who was also living in the area, so Agustina was not alone. Furthermore, she brought her dog with her for emotional support. Agustina's passion for travel was evident in her social media posts. Brazil, New Zealand, China, and European capitals like Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels were some of the destinations that Agustina had the pleasure of visiting and sharing with her 16,000 followers on Instagram. One of her future plans was to move to Europe. Candela, Agustina's 21-year-old sister, had come to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen. She wanted to enjoy the beautiful Mexican beach area and be close to her older sister. The two decided to share the apartment where Agustina lived because it had 2 rooms and they would be comfortable. At the end of December, Agustina's ex-boyfriend, Juan Manuel, reappeared. He came to visit her for the holidays. They reconciled, and he stayed to live with both girls. Candela would never have chosen to share an apartment with her sister's boyfriend, but things happened so quickly that before she realized it, the man was settled in Agustina's room. In her recent conversations with her family, Agustina admitted that they had decided to rekindle their relationship and announced that they planned to move to Spain. However, the peace in their relationship was always short-lived. On Thursday, February 16, there was a major argument because Agustina had discovered infidelity. The atmosphere in the apartment was extremely tense. On the afternoon of Friday, February 17, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan Manuel. When she returned the next day at 7 in the morning, she tried to enter her sister's apartment, but the door was locked. She asked the building's doorman if there was any way to enter, and he informed her that screams and a fight had been heard in that apartment during the night. The police had been called twice due to the neighbors' complaints. Candela went back to the apartment and insisted on trying to get in. She entered the access code, but it didn't work. The door was locked from the inside, so she had to knock. After persisting several times, her sister's boyfriend finally got up and opened the door. Almost immediately, Juan Manuel asked Candela where Agustina was, and she criticized him, saying how could she know where her sister was if she had left the previous evening, leaving the couple alone. She insisted that he should know where Agustina was, but he replied that she was sleeping. While they argued, Agustina's small dog began barking, and Candela followed the sound to the bathroom of the apartment. There, she found Agustina with a bathrobe belt around her neck, tied to a hand towel holder that was only 4 feet high. Agustina's sister and her boyfriend untied her and brought her to the living room, where they attempted CPR, but Agustina was already dead. Candela then called the police, and the forensic experts examined the scene and took the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was performed, and she was immediately cremated. The case was initially classified as suicide, and it was considered closed. However, despite the decision of the Mexican justice system, the Halbert family suspected that Agustina's death was actually a murder committed by her boyfriend, and they had their reasons. In late February, Edgardo sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry. The letter that reached the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs requested action from the competent authorities in Mexico and explained that the family had experienced a situation of helplessness regarding their daughter's death. He detailed that the judicial procedure was riddled with shortcomings because none of the basic protocols were applied to investigate the real causes of her death. The boyfriend was not detained, his phone was not confiscated, and no toxicological tests were conducted, nor were any injuries checked. In addition to all this, the family had no access to the case. Despite efforts by the Argentine consul to obtain copies of the proceedings, he was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, Edgardo recalled that the Foreign Ministry had an obligation to investigate and punish violence against women and to guarantee the family's right to clarification regarding the circumstances surrounding Agustina's death. Regarding this ongoing case, the Foreign Ministry's action is of utmost importance because, given the conditions of the investigation in Mexico, Juan Manuel is free to act. Since Agustina's death was classified as suicide, her partner's legal situation is not compromised at the moment, which is why he is not considered a fugitive, but a person of interest for the family. However, It is essential to bear in mind that both Agustina and Juan Manuel are Argentine citizens, and the foreign ministry must ensure the rights of both individuals, even if it is proven that the man committed the crime of which the family of the deceased influencer accuses him. On her part, Carolina, Agustina's mother, embarked on a crusade in the media to seek justice and put pressure on Mexican investigators. She denounced the violent relationship between the victim and her partner. Carolina asserted that her daughter was killed by her boyfriend, and she mentioned in a televised interview that her daughter had been tortured, burned, abused, and beaten, including blows to the head, all prior to her death. She was convinced that he had staged the supposed hanging from a towel rack. Agustina was a tall girl, and she was dressed and ready to go out when Candela found her. According to Carolina, nobody who is contemplating suicide takes the time to get dressed up. She recalled that Juan Manuel had a history of violence. During a press conference shared on social media, it was revealed that the couple had been dealing with ongoing issues that had been kept a secret. She mentioned that the man had never inspired trust, and 2 years earlier, they had rescued Agustina from the apartment she shared with Juan Manuel after a physical assault on her part. She stated that if they hadn't gone to rescue her that day, her daughter would have lost her life at that moment. After that violent incident, Agustina chose not to report it, and her parents decided to respect her decision, although they believed it was best not to let such incidents go unreported to the authorities. The consequences of not taking action at that time were felt 2 years later in Mexico. According to her mother's account, on Friday, February 17, Agustina sent a message at 2:30 p.m. saying that she felt ugly and believed that she did not deserve a man who would hurt her. Carolina provided support from afar and encouraged her to leave the apartment. She reminded her that there was no need to be with that man. She advised her to kick him out of the house and not even get upset about a person who wasn't worth it. In her opinion, her daughter, by returning to that violent man, had played a risky card, and it ended badly, to her regret. The model's uncle, Herman, stated that Juan Manuel's parents had contacted the family and promised to cooperate. However, the dialogue ended when the man did not show up for a Zoom meeting where he was supposed to share his version of the events. Regarding this absence, Carolina said that he had remained in hiding but was likely listening and watching everything to stay informed about the case. In her view, he would have given his version if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she said that Juan Manuel's parents were responsible for covering up what she considered a monster. On March 8, International Women's Day, there were marches in Mexico and Argentina, demanding justice for Agustina. This increased pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which announced that it would investigate the death of the Argentine model as a possible femicide. This decision was based on the autopsy report, which showed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple lacerations on the body, and bruises consistent with sexual abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Halbert family analyzed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, such as punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. Additionally, the forensic expert noted lacerations in several parts of the body and internal and external hematomas, suggesting recent and non-consensual sexual activity. However, the only available evidence is this forensic report because, as mentioned earlier, the Mexican authorities proceeded to cremate Agustina's body shortly after classifying the case as suicide. Following the mobilizations on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it had reclassified the case, originally labeled as suicide, and had begun investigating it as a possible femicide. The family's lawyer stated that the case had been referred to a special unit equipped to handle such cases. She further accused the main suspect, Juan Manuel, of attempting to stage his suicide and highlighted signs of violence at the scene. The apartment was locked from the inside. There were visible injuries on both the victim and her partner. A table leg was found out of place and on the floor, and 2 calls had been made to the police the previous night. She also criticized the judicial investigation, revealing that the crime scene had not been properly secured Contrary to protocol, it was essential for the scene and the victim's body to be preserved until the investigation concluded. She added that due to numerous errors, information that could have been obtained from the devices was lost since the perpetrator took the cell phones and all the data with him. The investigation into Agustina's violent death in Mexico promises to be a challenging journey for the family, which has been following the case from Argentina, more than 7,000 kilometers away, with a different legal system and culture. New statements were made by the prosecutor of the state of Quintana Roo on March 13, 2023, asserting that the Argentine model and influencer had taken her own life parishionment, and scientifically. These declarations were made during a press conference held by the security cabinet of that Mexican province. The prosecutor detailed that there was a history of violence both before and during her relationship with her partner. He stated that it could not be ruled out that Juan Manuel might have induced her to take her own life, and that could be a matter of investigation. When questioned by journalists about the cigarette burns on the woman's body, he assured that these injuries occurred before her suicide. He explained that there had been violence the night before her death between her and her partner, and there was sufficient evidence of this. Regarding Juan Manuel, the prosecutor stated that he had been interviewed by the investigative police, and at that time, they did not have enough evidence for an arrest or any other legal action against him. However, this did not mean that he would not be pursued later if a connection to Agustina's death could be established. Edgardo, Agustina's father, insisted on the need to change the classification of the case, as their lawyer had found numerous pieces of evidence to classify it as femicide. When asked by an Argentine media about the prosecutor's statements, Herman, the victim's uncle, expressed that they were not surprised that the Attorney General was defending the suicide theory, because acknowledging that there were many elements suggesting femicide would mean admitting their failures. He believed that the prosecution had acted clumsily and hastily in the early stages of the investigation, leading to the loss of crucial evidence. However, as the case was transferred to the specialized unit, it indicated that something had gone wrong, as it is not common to replace a team that had performed well. He argued that the prosecutor was trying to defend the initial theory because going in a different direction would be an acknowledgement of their poor work. Gerardo Reynoso, a journalist, provided details of the judicial process. He explained that the Prosecutor General's office reclassified the death as femicide due to pressure from Agustina's family, the lawyer, and a feminist march on March 8th. However, in the subsequent hours, the justice system announced that they were still considering the suicide theory. He highlighted that, in general, the prosecutor's office did not want to validate the independent expert opinion that had found injuries compatible with femicide. Recognizing this would mean accepting that someone outside the prosecutor's office had solved a problem they should have handled with a properly executed expert analysis. Regarding Juan Manuel's situation, he pointed out that the prosecutor's office would have to call the boyfriend to discuss the case. In the event of her suicide, he would inevitably be part of the investigation, at least in the statements that should have been taken to determine what had happened. To make matters worse, the journalist emphasized that the crime was discovered on a weekend and during weekends in Mexico. Intern trainees and junior investigators typically handle duties. This could have been the reason why everything was mishandled. He believed that their actions were not malicious, but rather due to a lack of experience, and this was reflected in how the case was handled. Some days later, in Argentina, news surfaced about a call received by Agustina's father. A couple of days after the Women's Day March, a prosecutor from Quintana Roo contacted Edgardo by telephone on the instruction of the state prosecutor office, who wanted to speak with the family. Before hearing from the father, the person on the phone, speaking on behalf of others whose identities were unclear, stated that the system wanted to apologize for what had happened. They emphasize that if Agustina's boyfriend bore any responsibility, they would certainly prosecute, as there was no intention within the prosecutor's office to cover up anything. They added that if any public servant from the prosecutor's office was found responsible, measures would be taken. He also quickly clarified that he would organize a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of experts to show the father what they had. He stated that the general prosecutor had instructed that other state agencies in Mexico should also review the autopsy. Then the prosecutor, who had been speaking gently, abruptly shifted his tone and raised a complaint. He mentioned that it had been claimed that they did not follow the femicide protocol, and he argued that every death of a woman was worked on according to the femicide protocol. Edgardo also dropped the formality and transitioned from being a grieving father to one demanding justice for Agustina. After asking the prosecutor for his name, he directly addressed him as Carlos and firmly presented his point of view on the matter. He told him that if supposed experts found a young girl deceased in the situation she was in, hanging with a man inside the residence, and they didn't detain that man, didn't take his statement, and didn't seize his phone, then the investigation left much to be desired. He added that after reviewing the autopsy and witnessing what his daughter had endured, the conclusion for him was that everything had failed, a 100% failure, because his daughter had died. The latest information came at the end of March, just days before the 1-month anniversary of Agustina's death. The hypotheses of suicide and femicide are still being pursued on separate tracks. Halbert's lawyer said that the case had been transferred to the Women's Crimes Division, meaning Agustina's case is now on the femicide and gender violence table. She continued to work with the prosecutor handling the case and focused solely on demonstrating the femicide angle, providing more evidence, and investigating the boyfriend's involvement. She apologized for not being able to provide more details, but explained that all leads related to the murder were under seal. Regarding the question of when Juan Manuel could be arrested, the lawyer stated that it would depend on the conclusion of the investigation and that it was up to the prosecutor to determine if sufficient evidence had been provided or if more was needed. However, she reiterated her confidence in being able to prove everything. Neighbors reported hearing screams until around 2:30 in the morning. According to statements obtained after that time, silence prevailed at the scene. The time of death listed in the incomplete autopsy report is 4 a.m. While Agustina's family continues to demand justice, the alleged perpetrator is in an unknown location. Although the Mexican justice system has not issued an arrest warrant against him, and no judicial proceedings have been opened in Argentina because the alleged crime occurred in another country, he remains free. However, he has not made himself visible and has not faced the family of the girlfriend he supposedly loved and lived with until the day of her death. This case is still in development, but due to its preliminary stage, many proceedings are conducted discreetly and away from the media. The prosecutor's office investigating the alleged femicide issued a document to determine Reverter's whereabouts. The order was issued on June 7th by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for the Investigation and Prosecution of Femicide to search for, locate, and request Reverter's presentation without depriving him of his freedom. As stated, the goal is to expand their interview to gather more information and comply with this authority's request. Francisco Benitez, known as Paco, entered the world on December 13, 1963, in Algeciras, a city in Spain. Growing up alongside his 2 brothers and 1 sister, he spent his childhood in a town bordering Morocco. Paco received his education at a Catholic boarding school. When he turned 20, he made a significant move to Seville, where his parents, including his mother, whose occupation remains unknown, and his father, a retired nursing assistant, had settled. In 1986, Paco embarked on a new journey by enlisting in the French Foreign Legion, a branch of the French military with a storied history dating back to 1831. During his service, Paco was assigned to various missions, including deployments to the Persian Gulf and Gabon, where he demonstrated his dedication and valor. In recognition of his service, he was honored with the Cross of War and the Military Medal. In 1988, while stationed in Marseille, Paco's path crossed with Marie Jose, or Maria Jose, as he called her, a French woman working in bars near the port he frequented. Maria Jose was a single mother raising 4 children, each from a different father. Paco and Maria Jose began dating and soon decided to move in together. Over time, their family expanded, and on May 24, 1994, Maria Jose and Paco welcomed their first child together, Allison, who became Paco's cherished firstborn daughter. Paco was known for his deep love and protective nature as a father, although he also had a history of infidelity. Around 1998, Paco embarked on a tumultuous relationship with Simone de Oliveira Alves, a young woman of Brazilian origin with 4 children. He met Simone in a club, and for some years he led a double life with her until their relationship ultimately came to an end in late 2004. Despite Maria Jose's discovery of Paco's infidelity, she chose to forgive him. More than a decade after Allison's birth, Maria Jose and Paco decided to formalize their relationship through marriage. Their wedding took place on November 10, 2006. This event marked the occasion when Maria Jose adopted her husband's last name, and they both endeavored to build a harmonious and contented life together. In 2010, Paco experienced another relocation, this time to the recruitment area of the French Foreign Legion in Perpignan, a city situated in southern France. As of December 2012, troubles began to emerge within the couple's relationship, culminating in their separation. Maria Jose initiated divorce proceedings, driven by a discovery made by their daughter during the Christmas of 2012. It was during this time that Allison stumbled upon messages of affection exchanged between her father and a new romantic interest named Dolores, a fellow soldier stationed in Perpignan. Learning of Paco's continued infidelity, Maria Jose confronted him, no longer willing to tolerate his unfaithfulness, which ultimately led to his departure from their home. Despite the challenges in his marriage, Paco continued to engage in romantic pursuits. He parted ways with Dolores when she sought a more committed relationship, and he subsequently commenced a new affair with a familiar face, compatriot Maria Teresa, who worked as a guard at the French consulate in Barcelona. Meanwhile, as her mother navigated the complexities of divorce proceedings, Allison sought to lead a typical life for a young person her age. At 19, she secured employment at a hair salon and nurtured her interests in modeling and beauty pageants, passions that had taken root in her early years. Allison's educational achievements, kindness, and natural beauty had earned her a coveted spot in a beauty competition scheduled for August 11, 2013. Winning this competition would have opened doors for her, guaranteeing participation in Miss France 2014 and bringing her one step closer to realizing her dream of being crowned the most beautiful woman in her country. However, on July 14, 2013, while the French were celebrating their national holiday, a preparatory meeting for the contestants took place. Surprisingly, Allison did not attend this crucial meeting, causing surprise among her fellow contestants and organizers. From that day onwards, neither she nor her mother were heard from again. According to Paco's account, on Sunday the 14th, he had driven his daughter to the pre-contest meeting. Subsequently, he returned to their family home, where he found himself embroiled in an argument with Maria Jose over an electricity bill. Paco stated that he later went back to pick up Allison, and they both returned to their city of residence. Upon their arrival, he discovered that Maria Jose had packed her bags, seemingly preparing to leave the house with her younger daughter, heading towards Toulouse. This was the story Paco shared with anyone seeking news of Allison and Maria Jose. A text message sent from Maria Jose's phone at 5:17 p.m. on that Sunday seemed to corroborate this account. In the message, she informed her eldest daughter, Lydia, that they were going to Toulouse. She found this decision reasonable, given that her sister aspired to work for a renowned cosmetics manufacturer, and Maria Jose was also in search of employment in that town. Unfortunately, this was the last communication received from them. Allison was known for her active presence on social media, but on July 14, shortly before 5 p.m., her Facebook account went silent. Concern began to grow among those closest to her, especially considering her consistent online activity. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to contact them, a family friend eventually reported their disappearance to the police. Initially, authorities argued that since both Maria Jose and Allison were adults, they had the freedom to travel without notifying anyone. However, the pressure from concerned family members eventually led Paco to make the difficult decision to report the disappearance of Maria Jose, aged 53, and Allison, aged 19, on July 25. This action marked the initiation of a police investigation into their mysterious disappearance. Investigations unveiled unsettling details. Both of their phones had been switched off since July 14, and no credit card transactions were recorded. Furthermore, there was no trace of the mother and daughter at Toulouse or the Perpignan train station, both logical departure points given that they did not possess a car or driver's licenses for independent travel. Interviews with friends and family firmly ruled out the possibility of them running away, particularly in Allison's case, as she was deeply enthusiastic about her life in Perpignan and her dream of becoming a beauty queen. A delegate from the Miss France Committee shared in an interview that participating in the competition had been Allison's dream, and she had been highly motivated. She also recounted how Allison would frequently call for advice on what to wear in the days leading up to events. Additionally, she emphasized Allison's punctuality and her habit of notifying them if she was running late, making her sudden absence without explanation all the more perplexing. The investigation naturally focused on Paco, as he was the last person known to have seen them alive. Compounding his situation, the ongoing issues with his ex-partner and revelations of his double life made him the prime suspect. Media coverage of the case intensified, and the French public became engrossed in the unfolding mystery. Journalists crowded the street where the family's house was located, and passers-by didn't hesitate to direct accusations at Paco. On August 5, 3 weeks after the disappearance of his ex-wife and daughter, 50-year-old Paco was tragically discovered deceased. He had taken his own life by hanging himself in the barracks of the Foreign Legion, where he worked as a recruitment officer. Forensic experts determined that his death occurred between 5 and 7 in the morning of that fateful day. Following Paco's tragic death, a series of emails and letters addressed to coworkers and family members came to light, along with a final video that was published on the website of a French magazine. In these messages, Paco expressed his enduring love for his wife and daughter, emphasizing that the burden of suspicion had pushed him to take his own life. One of Paco's last lovers recounted that he had vehemently maintained his innocence and couldn't bear the weight of being viewed as the prime suspect in a crime against his daughter and former wife. French media initially reported that Paco's suicide was driven by overwhelming guilt. However, Maria Jose's brother conveyed a different perspective when he spoke to journalists. He did not believe that his brother-in-law had harmed his family or played a role in their disappearance. He described the last time he had seen Paco on Sunday, August 4, as a moment when Paco appeared utterly broken. Paco had described himself as a man of honor, but with nothing left to lose. During that interaction, he also shared his suspicion that his sister had left their home in a fit of anger and might be in a place where she couldn't easily return due to the scandal surrounding her disappearance. These statements introduced doubt about Paco's guilt and even stirred feelings of sympathy and compassion for the deceased legionnaire. However, the same video and news of Paco's death brought forth a revelation that altered the course of the narrative. This revelation harkened back to 2004 and pertained to Simone, the woman with whom Paco had a double life. It emerged that upon learning of Paco's death through the news, Simone's relatives recognized him and promptly contacted the authorities. They revealed that Paco had been Simone's lover for 6 years until her inexplicable disappearance. In connection to this, one of Simone's sisters disclosed that shortly before vanishing, Simone had been hospitalized due to either a spontaneous abortion or an attempted suicide following a violent altercation with Paco. This fight reportedly occurred because Simone had discovered that Paco had not yet separated from his wife, Maria Jose. Tragically, Simone never reappeared, and Paco moved on with his life. As investigators compared both cases, they noted some striking similarities. Firstly, in both cases, the last sign of life from the women involved was a text message sent from their phones. Simone informing Paco that she was leaving, and Maria Jose sending a message to one of her daughters. These parallels raised questions and added a layer of complexity to the mystery surrounding the disappearances. Another notable similarity in both cases relates to the delay in reporting the disappearances by Paco. In November 2004, he waited for several days before reporting Simone's disappearance to the police, a pattern that raised suspicion, even though he could no longer be prosecuted for the crimes committed. In late September 2013, a report raised disturbing questions. It was revealed that in mid-July, Paco had purchased a significant quantity of lye, a chemical known for its ability to degrade DNA, making it challenging for forensic experts to detect traces of cleaned blood at a crime scene. During meticulous forensic examinations, officials from the crime lab discovered compelling evidence of a substantial blood spill that had been meticulously cleaned both in the residence where Maria Jose and Allison lived and in the barracks where Paco worked. Specifically, blood was confirmed to be present in the drainage of a freezer. A fellow soldier recounted that on July 17, he had assisted Paco in transporting this freezer from his home to the Legion's headquarters. The same witness informed the police that he had seen traces of blood in a clogged sink within Paco's apartment. Moreover, officials found indications of blood in the room that Paco occupied within the barracks and within a washing machine where he had been observed washing sheets and clothing. Other unsettling details centered around the alleged disappearance of approximately 30 bed sheets from the military installation in July. Additionally, there were reports of a soldier who had witnessed Paco using a hose to clean a carpet from which a reddish liquid was emerging, a situation the man had explained as a result of staining while defrosting meat. Despite the high hopes generated by these revelations, the police faced difficulties in conclusively establishing the connection between Allison's DNA and the traces of washed blood or determining whether it resulted from the young girl's contact with the analyzed items. But her mother's blood DNA was found in the family washing machine. The neighbors also recalled Paco switching his vehicle from a white car to a dark van around the time of their disappearance. The van was subsequently seized by the police for further examination, although initial tests did not yield any immediate results. Nevertheless, the introduction of this new evidence into the case file only served to intensify suspicions of criminal involvement by Paco. As discussions surrounding Paco's possible connection to the disappearances gained momentum, reactions from those who knew the family were swift. Allison's former boss expressed how the entire community was deeply shaken by the unfolding story. Allison had been a beloved and dedicated employee at the hair salon, and her absence had a profound impact on the clientele. To them, it was inconceivable that her father could be linked to her disappearance. An unnamed family member told French media that Allison had been actively trying to understand the true nature of Paco. She questioned why her affectionate father was frequently absent, including during holidays like Christmas. She even harbored suspicions that her father might have had a double life with another family elsewhere and was possibly tracking one of his lovers on the internet. These revelations added layers of complexity and intrigue to the already perplexing case. Maria Jose's brother, whom we've mentioned previously, shared the ongoing anguish that his family endured 5 months after that fateful July 14. He revealed that their desperation had not subsided since the beginning of the ordeal. He described how his life had come to a standstill, often disrupted by sleepless nights where he would turn to his computer in search of answers. He also expressed deep concern for his nephews, Maria Jose's other children, who had essentially been raised by Paco and affectionately referred to him as Dad. In contrast to his initial impressions after the disappearances, he stated that all the elements of the investigation seemed to point towards Paco as the primary suspect in the eyes of his family. However, he acknowledged that the evidence incriminating Paco was not sufficient to definitively prove that he had murdered Maria Jose and Allison. On the other hand, he remained open to the possibility that Paco might have had an accomplice. This theory arose from the last message allegedly sent by Maria Jose, which was written in impeccable French. He believed it couldn't have been Paco's work, as he struggled with the French language and had poor writing skills. He emphasized that at times when he communicated with Paco, he even had to ask him to rewrite sentences because they were incomprehensible. He vividly remembered Paco as a fiercely protective father who had never exhibited any signs of violence, making it inconceivable to him that Paco could harm his own daughter. He recounted that on the night before Paco took his own life, they spent 2 hours with him, and he appeared utterly devastated, continuously mentioning that he was going to do something reckless. Later that evening, Paco went to have dinner with one of his military colleagues, and when he called him again an hour later, Paco seemed calm. What struck him as very strange was the fact that he had to learn about the disappearances through television on August 1. In the midst of the turmoil, he reached out to Paco, who explained the disappearance and the supposed journey undertaken by Maria Jose and Allison. Paco reminded him that Maria Jose had left their home for 4 days on a prior occasion. Additionally, Paco apologized for not being in touch and claimed to have lost his contacts. 1 year after Allison and her mother's inexplicable disappearance, the judge in charge met with Maria Jose's brother, who had become the main civil party involved in the perplexing case. In that conversation, Maria Jose's brother was informed that investigations were still ongoing, reigniting a glimmer of hope that someday they might uncover the truth. Following this meeting, Maria Jose's brother candidly admitted that he woke up every morning with the hope of receiving a call, informing him that they had been found. Although he had become more cautious and less optimistic over time, he underscored the importance of discovering the whole truth. He had become convinced of Paco's involvement in his family member's disappearance when Marie's DNA was found in the washing machine. He acknowledged that his life had essentially come to a halt since his sister and niece vanished. He dedicated all his time to collecting, comparing, and assembling evidence, driven by an unwavering determination to uncover the truth. Almost 3 years after the mysterious disappearances, it appeared that definitive evidence was within reach, though investigators exercised caution in their pursuit of the truth. During that time, bone fragments were discovered on a secluded beach. The seemingly human bones were stumbled upon by none other than Maria Jose's own brother, who found them inside a plastic bag. He swiftly arrived at the scene after receiving a tip from a witness and immediately alerted the authorities. 5 investigators from the judicial police were tasked with conducting excavations, with the presence of a forensic doctor who played a crucial role in extracting the bones. The discovery prompted the investigation to determine the causes of death. The police announced that DNA analysis would be conducted in the following days, but the expected resolution did not materialize. The family's lawyer held a strong belief that these remains belonged to the 2 missing women. His conviction was grounded in the fact that shortly after their disappearance, it was determined through the location data of his cell phone that Paco had been in close proximity to the location where the bones were discovered. Indeed, in the months that followed July 2013, exhaustive searches had been carried out in that expansive sandy area, all to no avail. The most recent information regarding this enigmatic case dates back to the year 2021, indicating that the bodies of Maria and Allison had still not been located. The family's lawyer, in his assessment, contended that the case had been mishandled from the very beginning. He explained that the initial hours and days are crucial in solving a crime, and therefore the delayed report significantly impeded the investigation. In his view, the prospects of unraveling the mystery surrounding the disappearance of Maria Jose and Allison might have extinguished on the same day. Paco took his own life, carrying all his secrets to the grave. Felix Verdejo, born on May 19, 1993, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, began his journey in the sporting world at a tender age, swiftly rising to prominence by the age of 19. Celebrated as Puerto Rico's gem, Verdejo quickly made a name for himself in the competitive arena, consistently triumphing over his adversaries, regardless of their reputation or prowess. In 2014, his career reached a significant milestone when a major sports network recognized him as the most promising athlete of the year. By this time, Verdejo's net worth had astonishingly soared to $1 million. This rise to fame was particularly evident during his unforgettable match against Laurel Alcantar, another undefeated contender. The bout, filled with high expectations and comparisons, ended dramatically when Verdejo showcased his dominance by knocking out Alcantar in a mere 21 seconds of the first round. Verdejo's record of 16 wins without a loss solidified his status as an international boxing icon. In 2016, he tied the knot with Elis Marie Santiago, a renowned social media influencer. The couple, having started their relationship back in 2011 during their high school days, welcomed their daughter Miranda in 2018. However, Verdejo faced a new challenge after a 13-month hiatus from the ring. His comeback was against the world-class Mexican boxer Antonio Lozada Jr. The match, as anticipated, was an intense showdown. Going into the final round, Verdejo was leading, but visibly drained. In a surprising turn, with only 30 seconds remaining, Lozada Jr. unleashed a barrage of punches, leading to an intervention by the doctor and marking Verdejo's first defeat. Despite his public persona as an exemplary family man, Verdejo had a hidden side. He was involved with individuals in the substance trafficking world and had numerous affairs. One such relationship was with his ex-girlfriend from school, Kisha Rodriguez, which eventually revealed the darker aspects of Verdejo's character. Kisha Rodriguez, sharing Verdejo's birth year and city, had a close relationship with her parents and her sister, living in an apartment in San Juan. Close to her sister, Kisha's life intertwined tragically with Verdejo's tumultuous path. She lived alone with her two little dogs, whom she treated as if they were her children. Kisha was a great animal lover, which is why she worked at a pet grooming salon. One of her qualities that always stood out was her dedication to caring for animals. She was also known for being quite shy, calm, and reserved. She would meet Felix Verdejo in 2010 when she was around 16 years old, and they both attended the same school. They started a relationship while still teenagers, and although many believed they were deeply in love, the truth was that Felix was seeing other girls behind her back, and he didn't make much effort to hide it. His own wife came from the same school, but somehow, both Kisha and Felix stayed together in a toxic relationship marked by temporary separations due to frequent fights. Initially, their relationship was normal until Felix began to rise in his boxing career and met Elis Santiago. He maintained relationships with both women in parallel. Few years later, out of nowhere, Kisha and her acquaintances were surprised to hear that Felix had proposed to Elis, which for many showed that he had finally made a choice. Kisha continued with her life, getting to know other people. But despite Felix being in a new family, it didn't take him long to find a way to continue seeing her in secret. This way, Felix would take Kisha on many of his so-called work trips, and they would stay in hotels together far from his wife. Even Kisha's family were aware of this, as he used to visit them as if nothing was happening. As a result of these unhealthy behaviors, Kisha's family always advised her to distance herself from Felix, as he was only hurting her and didn't truly value her. However, every time Kisha attempted to break away from Felix, he would seek her out with promises of love, swearing that she would always be the only woman he truly loved. And surely Kisha believed every word, because despite the years and all the harm he had done, she truly loved him to the point of getting a diamond tattooed on her back as a symbol that he was her true love. On the other hand, Felix's adventures were no secret to his wife, as she had her suspicions, and as 2021 unfolded, the once promising marriage of the boxing sensation was unraveling. Felix Verdejo, no longer the youthful star in the ring, faced a personal crisis. His wife, Elis, having grappled with her own challenges in life, found it increasingly difficult to overlook Felix's indiscretions. The core issue lay in Felix's reckless behavior, particularly his habit of sending intimate messages to various women, including his former girlfriend, Kisha. Despite being married, Felix assured Kisha that a divorce was imminent, a promise that only further strained his marriage. Elis, feeling betrayed by Felix's lack of loyalty, eventually reached her breaking point and decided to expel him from their home. Felix pleaded for forgiveness, desperate not to disrupt their daughter's life with a broken home. However, his excuses only revealed his deeper flaws. He justified his actions by claiming a need for physical intimacy, which he sought elsewhere when Elis was unavailable. His treatment of Kisha was equally problematic, viewing her as merely an option among many and exerting possessive control over her social interactions. In April 2021, despite Felix's pleas, Elis made the difficult decision to ask him to leave, giving him only a short grace period to find alternative accommodation. Meanwhile, Kisha discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that brought joy to her family, but dismay to Felix, who had always made clear that their relationship was not serious. He prioritized his family and career over everything else, leading Kisha to decide on raising the child independently, in line with her values, despite Felix's reluctance. For Felix, however, the pregnancy posed a significant dilemma, threatening the freedom he cherished. He arranged a meeting with Kisha on the morning of April 29, 2021, under the guise of discussing the pregnancy and confirming its validity. Before the meeting, Kisha informed her mother about her plans, unaware of the ominous feelings her mother harbored about Felix's reaction to the pregnancy news. However, there was nothing she could do, and besides, Kisha sounded calm and mentioned that this time it was Felix himself who was looking for her because he now seemed unusually interested in the baby matter. That morning, Kisha had to go to work earlier than usual because she had to open the store with her boss. So without thinking much, she quickly drove her car to the place where Felix had asked her to meet him, which wasn't far from her home. However, at 8 a.m., her boss had arrived early to open the store, but seeing no trace of her, he messaged her on WhatsApp and started calling her. When he noticed that his messages were marked as read and the calls went unanswered, he began to worry that something bad might have happened. He contacted Kisha's sister to ask her about Kisha or if she knew anything about her absence. Her sister, who had no idea what was going on, was surprised that her sister was missing work like this. So she told Kisha's boss that she would try to locate Kisha to make sure everything was okay. Then she called her mother quickly around 9 a.m. to inquire about Kisha since she had received no response from her sister's phone, and Kisha had also missed work. Kisha's mother immediately realized that something had happened to her daughter, and Felix was likely involved because her daughter was not the type to disappear without communicating with anyone. First, she tried to contact Kisha herself, but like the others, she received no signs of life. Without hesitation, she took the first flight from Orlando, where she was at the moment, to get to Puerto Rico as soon as possible. Upon arriving, she went to a nearby clinic that performed abortions to see if Kisha was there, as she knew that Felix had pressured her daughter several times not to have the baby. However, the clinic was closed that day, so she headed to Kisha's house, where she found her daughter's 2 dogs without food, which was quite unusual because Kisha always took good care of her pets as part of her daily routine. All of this indicated that something was wrong, so she started asking the neighbors about Kisha, and they told her that they hadn't even seen her walking her dogs that morning, as she usually did. With this unusual situation, Kisha's mother had no choice but to realize that there was only one person who could answer all her questions about where her daughter was, and that person was Felix Verdejo. So she began calling him on his cell phone, and after several attempts, he finally answered. When she asked him about Kisha, he responded with an uncomfortable silence and only said that he had no idea where she could be. He repeated this multiple times, leaving the woman with no option but to hang up. Despite Felix's denial and his lack of interest in searching for Kisha, her family didn't wait any longer and reported Kisha's disappearance to the authorities. With Kisha's mother testimony, the police made Felix Verdejo the prime suspect, as he was apparently the last person seen with the victim alive. The investigation into Kisha Rodriguez's disappearance swiftly commenced, centering on her recent cell phone activity and call history. On the morning of April 30th, Kisha's family made a heartfelt appeal on a live TV broadcast, seeking public assistance in locating her. They disclosed her relationship with Felix Verdejo and her pregnancy, which was reportedly unwelcome news to the boxer. This revelation quickly dominated media headlines. Later that day, Kisha's car was discovered abandoned. It was found thanks to alert neighbors who notified the police, noting its unusual presence in the area. Examination of the vehicle revealed unlocked doors and untouched personal belongings, eliminating robbery as a motive. At 10:45 a.m., Felix Verdejo appeared at the police headquarters with his lawyer, adhering to legal advice to remain silent. Subsequently, Elis Santiago was also called in to give her statement, as the case began to take on the appearance of a crime of passion, and she was considered a potential suspect. The police intensified their search efforts, seeking security footage from Kisha's last known locations and her usual route. Their focus was also on the final known location of her cell phone, which, intriguingly, matched the location recorded on Felix Verdejo's phone, suggesting that both were in the same area at the time of her disappearance. Investigations revealed that both phones had been in proximity to a bridge, prompting a thorough examination of nearby surveillance cameras. Footage showed that on the morning of the disappearance, a dark SUV parked in an emergency lane near the bridge. Someone exited the vehicle briefly before re-entering and driving off. What raised suspicion was the SUV's return to the same spot at least twice more. Further scrutiny identified this vehicle as a black Dodge Durango, identical to the model owned by Felix Verdejo, deepening the mystery and intensifying the scrutiny on his involvement. On Saturday, May 1st, at 2 p.m., an anonymous 911 call provided shocking information about Kisha's disappearance. The authorities wasted no time and went to the location given by the anonymous informant. There, they discovered a lifeless body floating in the San Jose Lagoon. When the police notified Kisha's family via phone call about the discovery of a body that matched certain characteristics of her, the family was summoned to identify the body, and that's when it was confirmed that it was indeed Kisha Rodriguez. The forensic examination revealed that Kisha had a fractured jaw and a significant blow to her nose. In addition, the blood analysis showed the presence of drugs capable of rendering someone unconscious to the point of fainting. Her hands and feet were bound with a metal cable to a concrete block, which seemed to have been intended to weigh down her body to the bottom of the lagoon. The victim appeared to be alive until the moment she was thrown into the water, leading to the conclusion that she died from drowning. The following day, the police went to Felix's residence, where they seized his SUV for investigation and analysis, as it was evidently the vehicle used to transport the victim's body. On the evening of May 2nd, Felix turned himself in at the police station with his lawyer and was arrested on charges of kidnapping, auto theft, murder, and the death of an unborn child since the victim was pregnant with a 1-month-old embryo. The boxer was taken to prison without the option of posting bail to prevent him from fleeing the country. Meanwhile, a few days before his arrest, something unexpected happened. A man named Luis Cadiz contacted lawyers, claiming to be an important witness in the case and in need of their services for his defense. He did not have enough financial resources to pay for legal representation, but what he was about to confess would also implicate himself in the crime. These lawyers wasted no time in contacting the police, stating that they had a client with relevant information in this high-profile case. The witness's only request in exchange for his confession was witness protection, as he knew that Felix had the power and cold-bloodedness to have him killed. It was through Luis Cadiz that authorities learned that Felix Verdejo had not acted alone and that he had an accomplice in carrying out this crime. At this point, the entire population of Puerto Rico was outraged and shocked by how someone like Felix Verdejo, who was a national star, could do something like this to a pregnant woman he supposedly loved. The judicial process. By this stage, authorities had compiled a comprehensive collection of evidence against Felix Verdejo, including his text messages, financial records, and footage from security cameras tracking his SUV around the time of the crime. Verdejo's explanation was that he had planned to meet Kisha, but was delayed due to a prolonged training session, resulting in a missed encounter as Kisha had work commitments. Hillis Santiago, who had separated from Verdejo by then, reported that on April 29th, Felix had left early for a run and was out of contact until he returned home the next day to collect clothes before heading to the police station. It wasn't until May 2nd that Elis herself visited the station, where she was treated as a suspect. Felix later reached out to her, expressing regret for leaving her alone with their daughter and admitting his intention to surrender to the police. He downplayed the situation, claiming it was related to a drug trafficking charge. Elis, in a distressed state, revealed that she had received multiple threatening messages, accusing her of complicity in Kisha's murder. She was distraught not with Kisha, but with Felix's actions. Previous messages showed Felix apologizing to Elis for impregnating Kisha and expressing his desire not to have another child. Adding to the complexities, one of Felix's former partners came forward as a witness. She claimed that in 2013, Felix had coerced her into terminating a pregnancy that occurred during their nearly 5-year relationship. Felix had given her $300 and instructed her to ensure the pregnancy did not continue, even resorting to threats on one occasion. The most startling testimony, however, came from Ricardo Cadiz, the brother of Felix's alleged accomplice. Ricardo knew Felix since the pandemic, having sold him kilos of cocaine. In April 2021, Felix approached Ricardo for pills that could induce an abortion. On the day of Kisha's disappearance, Luis had asked Ricardo to pick him up where he had left Kisha's abandoned car. Ricardo connected the dots when the news reported the discovery of the car at the same location. When confronted, Luis broke down and confessed to being involved in a murder with Felix, although he claimed ignorance of the victim's identity. Following this revelation, Luis asked Ricardo for help in turning himself in because he couldn't bear the weight of what they had done. Ricardo then called the police to report his brother. Finally, the prosecution brought forward Luis Cadiz, who knew exactly what had happened on that Thursday, April 29th. He began by stating that neither of them had a plan in mind to take Kisha's life. He only knew that Felix was truly desperate and willing to do whatever it took to end the victim's pregnancy. Felix promised to pay Luis a large sum of money if he helped. The day before the incident, the two men had gone to Kisha's residence, but she wasn't there as she had gone to get her nails done, and it was getting late. They drove to the bridge where they finally left her to check the location of the cameras and their surroundings, preparing for their plan the next day with less margin for error. Later that night, they began to plan how they would commit the crime, and the idea of rendering the woman unconscious with a certain substance and then throwing her off the bridge came to mind. Louis provided Felix with a block of cement and a syringe containing a powerful substance. On the fateful day of April 29th, early in the morning, Felix Verdejo sent a message to Luis Kitties, which he later erased, stating, "We're coming for you, Titan." The duo then set off to meet Kisha at a prearranged location. Upon arrival, Felix instructed Kisha to get into the car, but she was taken aback to find Louis already inside, creating a tense atmosphere. Despite her apprehension, Felix reassured her there was nothing to worry about and asked her to give her car keys to Louis. Nervously, Kisha complied, stressing her need to not be late for work. Sensing the imminent danger, Kisha revealed her pregnancy, showing the document as evidence in hopes of evoking some compassion from them. This revelation, however, had no effect. In a sudden and violent turn, Luis grabbed her by the hair while Felix delivered a punch that knocked her unconscious. Louis then injected Kisha with 2 substances to ensure she remained unconscious, bound her hands and feet with a metal cable and a cement block, and then the men drove to the bridge. There, believing they were unobserved, they threw Kisha's body into Laguna San Jose while she was still alive. Felix, intent on ensuring the body would not be found, armed himself with a gun and instructed Louis to fire into the water. But both shots missed their mark. Louis then drove Kisha's car away to abandon it, and they both worked to clean Felix's SUV to eliminate any evidence. In his defense, Luis Kitties claimed that he was under the influence of alcohol and other substances during the crime. He expressed his subsequent remorse, considering turning himself in, and painted himself as a victim, citing depression and anxiety. This narrative sought to mitigate his role in the tragic and brutal events of that day. Puerto Rican former boxer Felix Verdejo was sentenced to life in prison on November 3, 2023 for crimes related to the kidnapping resulting in the death of Kisha Rodriguez, as well as the involuntary manslaughter of the fetus she was carrying. This sentence marks the end of a tragic and condemnable episode that shocked Puerto Rico and many people worldwide. The horrible James Bulger case. On February 12, 1993, a Friday afternoon in Bootle, England, specifically at the New Strand Shopping Centre, Denise was with a friend and her son, James Bulger. James had recently stopped using a stroller, as he was 2 years and 10 months old, so he was walking alongside his mother. At around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Denise's friend took a different path, leaving Denise alone with her little James. At one point, Denise went to a store with her son, bought what she needed, and when she realized it, she saw that James was not with her. It was only a momentary distraction for a few seconds as she checked her purse, but this oversight would change their lives forever. We all have memories of getting separated from family members in the shopping center as children, so the response here was quite common. When Denise left the store, she reunited with her friend, who had just passed by the front of the shop, but she didn't see James anywhere. They assumed he had wandered off, so they began asking the mall security guards and anyone they encountered if they had seen the child. Soon, announcements were made over the mall's speakers, inquiring about James, and as desperation mounted, several police patrols combed the area until nightfall. Yet there was still no sign of James. The next step for the police was to review the shopping center's security cameras, as it was their only hope of discovering what had happened that afternoon with James. It was 1993, and security cameras had limited resolution at that time, and this particular shopping center didn't have many of them. However, one camera happened to be pointed at the store. The footage showed James leaving through the door, and Denny's lapse in attention was indeed brief, as within a minute she could be seen searching for James at the door. But by then, it was already too late. The next trace of James was captured by one of the overhead cameras, showing him following two individuals. What was unusual was that these two individuals appeared to be teenagers, seemingly between the ages of 14 and 18. In the final image of James, he was seen leaving the shopping center with one of these boys holding his hand. Initially, there was hope, with the court thinking that these young boys wouldn't be capable of harming little James. However, 2 days later, the truth would come to light. More than 4 kilometers away from the shopping center, while playing, some teenagers stumbled upon the remains of a child on the train tracks, who had apparently been struck by a train. This discovery immediately set off alarms, and they contacted one of James' uncles, who unmistakably identified the child as James Bulger. It was clear that this was no accident. In fact, all evidence suggested that James had died before being struck by the train. His body bore so many injuries that investigators couldn't determine the exact cause of his death. There were 2 more unsettling details. He had a pair of batteries in his mouth, and his left eye had been eerily painted blue. It was as if his young body had been subjected to inhumane experimentation, and the crime scene would remain etched in the memory of all the officers present as one of the most horrifying scenes they had ever encountered in their careers. The local community was in shock and outrage over the tragic incident. Many expressed their heartfelt condolences to the family, particularly Denise. While she had a momentary lapse of attention, it was a mistake anyone could make, and those with empathy could understand the immense pain she was going through. She replayed in her mind daily the haunting thought that she might have saved her son had she been more vigilant at that moment. In addition to the sympathy, there were some individuals, including her own husband at one point, who angrily confronted her and blamed her for not being attentive enough, asserting that the tragedy could have been prevented with more careful supervision. The potential key to identifying the culprit lay in the shopping center's security cameras, but their image quality was so poor that even determining the suspects' ages was impossible. Various media outlets attempted to enhance the images in hopes of identifying the individuals, but their efforts proved fruitless. The last glimmer of hope rested on someone coming forward to confess to the crime. On February 16, just 2 days after James' body was discovered, the police received a crucial call. The caller accused a 12-year-old boy named Jonathan Green of being the perpetrator, and shockingly, this accusation came from his own parents. They claimed that their son bore a resemblance to one of the suspects captured in the security camera footage, a grave accusation indeed when it comes from one's own parents. Law enforcement took this accusation seriously and subjected Jonathan to nearly 23 hours of relentless interrogation before eventually declaring him innocent. In a subsequent interview, Jonathan revealed the profound psychological trauma he endured during this time, spending countless sleepless nights. The intensity of the questioning even tempted him to falsely admit guilt at one point. The parents, however, did not hesitate much before making the accusation, even though the images they based it on were captured just days earlier. Furthermore, Jonathan was a mere 12 years old, and giving him the benefit of the doubt should have been a priority. The only evidence against him was a vague resemblance, which wasn't particularly strong given the poor image quality, akin to images taken through a blender. The media, driven by the pursuit of attention, without much consideration, broadcasted Jonathan as the prime suspect. This prompted people, fueled by a thirst for justice, to attack the vehicle in which he traveled with his parents and to vandalize their home by pelting it with stones until all the windows were shattered. The harassment was so severe that the Greens had to abandon their home and relocate to another city. Just 6 days after Jane's disappearance, a television program showed all available information about the case up to that date, hoping that a viewer might provide a clue to apprehend the culprits. The program was immensely popular at the time, and following its broadcast, the police received several calls, with one call standing out as particularly valuable. It came from a woman who firmly believed that the real culprits were Robert Thompson and John Venables. These boys were known for their mischievous behavior, which had escalated into criminal activities such as theft. They had gained a notorious reputation at their schools and were frequent truants. However, a significant conflict arose when the police suspected that the culprits were at least 14 years old, while these potential suspects were just 10 years old. Due to this discrepancy and the fact that there were several other suspects of similar age, the police decided to pay a visit to the homes of these young boys, although their expectations were not high. Initially, they observed some peculiar behavior, but it was challenging to draw definitive conclusions from these observations since the police had very little experience dealing with child offenders of this age. Subsequently, it was confirmed that both boys had skipped school on that particular day. Additionally, there was a noticeable detail. One of John's shoes displayed clear stains of blue paint. This piece of evidence led the authorities to consider them as prime suspects, and they were promptly taken to the police station. Unlike the previous case with Jonathan, this time the authorities handled it discreetly to prevent the young boys from enduring the extensive hours of questioning in a single session. Consequently, the interrogations were spread out over multiple days. The initial day of questioning proved to be challenging, given the boys' age of just 10, and the authorities couldn't subject them to the same scrutiny as adults. As a result, both boys steadfastly denied any involvement in the crime, and their age and emotional state played a significant role in this response. However, as the interrogations continued into the second day, a marked contrast emerged between Robert and John. Robert remained composed, displaying little emotion, not shedding a tear, and maintaining a stoic demeanor. On the other hand, John's emotional resilience began to waver, and he eventually confessed to the crime. John revealed that on that fateful afternoon, he and Robert had decided to skip school as they often did and ventured to the shopping center. Their initial actions upon arrival included stealing various items, among them a pair of batteries and a can of blue paint. Growing weary of their theft spree, a sinister idea took hold in their young minds. The idea of kidnapping a child. They planned to take the child onto the street and push them in front of an oncoming car. To execute this plan, they first signaled to another child to approach them. Fortunately, the child's vigilant mother intervened in time, preventing any harm. Continuing with their disturbing plan, as they passed by a butcher shop, they signaled to James Bulger through the window. Tragically, James responded to their call and left the shop, unbeknownst to his mother. The two boys quickly whisked James away from the shopping center to carry out their dark scheme. However, James, with his remarkable balance, made it challenging for them to push him far enough onto the road for a car to strike him. Undeterred, they decided to take James to a nearby canal, intending to push him in and drown him. Upon reaching the canal, they pushed him from above, but instead of falling into the water, James tumbled and struck his forehead, resulting in a visible bump. His cries for help filled the air. It is estimated that approximately 38 individuals witnessed these two boys with James, and a few inquired about their actions. Initially, one of the boys falsely claimed that they were brothers, which caused frustration among those who witnessed the incident. It is important to note that the onlookers faced a challenging situation involving children who appeared innocent, making intervention at the time more complex. However, what remains alarming and subject to criticism is the false explanation provided by John and Robert to one individual, stating that James was a lost child, and they were taking him to a police station. At that point, an adult had to be held accountable because this tragic incident could have been prevented. It's clearly irresponsible to entrust the care of a lost child to two 10-year-olds. After walking for more than 4 kilometers, the boys took James to a remote railway track, devoid of any witnesses, and carried out unspeakable acts that are too gruesome to detail. They utilized whatever items they could find, including bricks, stones, and even a hefty 10-kilogram metal bar, inflicting unimaginable suffering upon James. When he lay lifeless, their intentions were unclear, whether to stage it as an accident or to inflict further harm on this young life. They left his lifeless body on the railway track, concealed beneath debris, to remain unnoticed until a passing train. Even the police found it difficult to comprehend such a horrifying reality, and they believed that there must have been prior signs or indicators. Consequently, they decided to delve into the backgrounds of these two young boys. As the police investigation continued, it became evident that both boys had experienced remarkably similar childhoods. Robert Thompson resided in a dysfunctional household where he and his 6 siblings suffered constant abuse from their father. His mother grappled with severe alcohol-related issues and had once attempted suicide while setting their home on fire. Robert had earned a reputation as a thief, displaying violent tendencies and compulsive lying. John Venables, on the other hand, came from a fractured family where his parents were divorced, and he received minimal attention and affection. Coupled with his short temper, John often engaged in mischief and fights to garner attention, eventually leading to his expulsion from school. It's widely believed that Robert took on the role of the ringleader during their terrible actions. Throughout the interrogations, both boys attempted to shift blame onto each other. Robert, displaying a shrewd demeanor, would acknowledge his presence but claim that he left when he saw John beginning to torment James on the railway tracks. When confronted with questions that cornered him, he would feign tears without shedding a single drop. However, the presence of blood and strands of James' hair on his clothing, particularly his shoes, served as irrefutable evidence of his involvement. Consequently, on February 20, both were declared guilty, identified only as Boy A and Boy B to circumvent potential issues similar to those faced by Jonathan Green. It was known only that they were two 10-year-old boys residing in Walton. This case was a recipe for turmoil. The brutal murder of a child as innocent as a 2-year-old had shaken the community, evoking tears and profound anger. The sentiment was so intense that it practically condemned the perpetrators to a life in hiding if they ever ventured into the public sphere. Yet, these culprits were merely children of 10, making any sentencing decision the subject of heated controversy. There was a significant divide in public opinion regarding the appropriate punishment for John Venables and Robert Thompson. While some called for the death penalty, others believed that a regular prison sentence would suffice. The debate also centered around the issue of anonymity. Why should these boys be shielded from public exposure when other murderers were not afforded the same privilege? Revealing their real names would effectively have been a death sentence, erasing all the efforts invested in their psychological rehabilitation. However, some may argue that if they didn't afford James a chance to live, why should they be allowed to live freely? When the trial started, the parents of the accused were moved to different parts of the country and assumed new identities following death threats. The full trial opened at Sessions House, Preston, on 1 November 1993, conducted as an adult trial with the accused in the dock away from their parents, and the judge and court officials in legal regalia. The boys denied the charges of murder, abduction, and attempted abduction. James's mother, devastated by the loss of her son, could only muster the strength to attend the day of the verdict. It wasn't until the sentencing that the judge permitted the media to publish the faces of Robert and John, who had shown no remorse throughout the 17-day trial. The evidence presented indicated that both boys understood the difference between right and wrong. John's tears seemed to stem from the anticipation of their impending fate, while Robert remained emotionally detached. With this knowledge in mind, on November 24, 1993, John Venables and Robert Thompson, initially facing a minimum of 15 years in prison, received a different sentence. They were to be held in a juvenile detention center until they turned 18, avoiding a real prison experience. This decision disappointed the public to the extent that riots erupted and vehicles believed to be carrying the boys were vandalized. However, these vehicles were decoys, and the boys were transported discreetly in other vehicles. From that point onward, they were granted new identities, shrouded in secrecy, known only to the authorities tasked with monitoring their lives. Initially, public outrage soared when news broke that the government had allocated £1.5 million, roughly equivalent to $2 million, for the rehabilitation of these young boys. This sparked a moral dilemma, as many argued that this substantial sum could have been better spent on saving innocent children, providing them with essential medications and sustenance. After all, this money came from hard-working taxpayers who weren't keen on supporting these boys financially. Some demanded a minimum prison sentence of 15 years for the young offenders, and this demand held some validity. Despite the expertise of psychologists, it's well established that by the age of 18, an individual's brain hasn't fully matured and latent issues may surface. Allowing potentially dangerous individuals to exit psychological support at this age was seen as a considerable risk. In June 2001, both boys were released, and their anonymity would only be lifted if they committed another crime. Interestingly, Robert, who initially appeared more problematic, managed to stay clear of criminal activity. On the contrary, John's behavior took a different turn, becoming a focal point for those questioning the efficacy of the system and how such individuals could be allowed to reintegrate into society. John's criminal history began with a brief jail sentence in 2008 for instigating a bar brawl and being found in possession of drugs. In 2010, he faced arrest for possessing indecent images related to child abuse. Subsequently, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison after confessing to downloading and disseminating such content online. Although he was released in 2013, he returned to jail in 2017 on the same charges. This time, he received a 40-month prison term after admitting to possessing over 1,000 explicit images. The exact details of his release and subsequent actions remain unclear, as authorities, seemingly regardless of his actions, continue to shield him from public scrutiny. Even 2 decades after the initial crime, John managed to claim another victim, 36-year-old Scott Bradley. Scott, a family man, fell prey to false rumors that he was, in fact, Robert Thompson. Over several months, he endured relentless harassment, insults, and threats directed at his family, and most importantly, his beloved son. During one phone call, he confided in his mother, expressing his unbearable distress and a desire to end his own life. Regrettably, she didn't take his words seriously, assuming the situation would eventually subside. Tragically, on August 10, 2012, Scott Bradley's mother discovered her son's lifeless body hanging from a noose. When authorities arrived at the scene, they determined it was a case of suicide. The mother of James Bulger, along with countless others, couldn't help but wonder if this tragedy might have been averted had the true identities of the original perpetrators been revealed. In late June 2019, it was reported that British officials had considered resettling Venables in Canada, Australia, or New Zealand due to the high cost behind protecting his anonymity. British authorities had reportedly spent £65,000 in legal fees to keep Venables' identity a secret. Rosa del Carmen Verduzco was born in 1934 in Zamora, Mexico, into a wealthy and well-positioned family within the community. She and her 4 siblings received a good education due to their status. Money was not a concern for the Verduzcos, but something about this privileged reality troubled Rosa's mind. While she and her family could afford anything they wanted and enjoy a good life, thanks to her father's ability to run commercial businesses, other children faced harsher realities. This seemed unacceptable to her, and from the moment she became aware of it, a compelling need to make a change about the issue that bothered her was born. Even at a young age, she understood that it was up to her to make a difference. However, this task would not be easy, as she came from a strict family, and she knew it well. It was rumored among the inhabitants of Zamora that in her preteens, Rosa had fallen in love with a laborer, and her parents did everything possible to stop the progression of that relationship. At that time, Rosa had no choice but to accept her parents' order to distance herself from that man. Outraged by what she had to endure, she swore she would never marry, but she would have children. One day, while walking through the streets of her city, she met a boy slightly younger than her, who was 13 at the time, living in the open. Rosa felt she could not turn a blind eye and had to remedy the terrible situation the boy was going through, rescuing him from poverty. She took him to live in her house with her family, so he could finally rest under a roof and have a meal on the table. Her parents refused, considering her too young to face such a responsibility, but they eventually agreed to receive him due to her persistence. For time, this activity became a habit for Rosa, or rather, her passion. After a few months, the number of children living under her care had multiplied. Amidst this turmoil in the Verduzco household, her father passed away. Although this terrible event deeply affected Rosa, she saw it as an opportunity to fully pursue her dream. So then, she convinced her mother to buy her a house where she could shelter and help more children. On one hand, Rosa was just as young as her rescued children and also needed adult care, but on the other hand, she would no longer have to occupy her own space. This was how Rosa settled in her first home, but she experienced firsthand what it was like to live without money or food. Far from being an impediment, she went out to walk the streets of the city with the other children to earn their daily food. Her dream was coming true as more and more children arrived at the home under her wing. The shelter began to receive donations from residents and prominent personalities who were moved by Rosa's altruism, allowing her to gather the necessary funds to buy a larger plot of land and build a shelter with much more capacity, the same shelter that years later became known as La Gran Familia. Rosa Verduzco's work was quickly recognized by the population, who were inspired by her commitment and devotion to the care of minors, and consequently, donations soon appeared: food, school supplies, cleaning products, and money, among other things, made it possible to maintain the place that Rosa and her children built with their own hands. In 1947, La Gran Familia opened its doors, but it was in 1973 that the establishment became a civil association, not only receiving street children but also those whose parents could not maintain them due to various difficulties, or who were affected by substance abuse. Keeping them under a roof was one of the objectives, but the priority of the shelter was to provide them with the necessary education to allow them to be professional and independent individuals in the future. For this reason, they had an educational program including primary, secondary, high school, and even university extension careers, recognized and validated by the government. In addition to conventional training, the minors attended physical education classes, sewing workshops, and many more categories. However, one of the most outstanding and proudest for Rosa was musical learning. The children residing in the establishment had to learn to play an instrument or sing. Thanks to this, a large orchestra was formed that did not miss a celebration without presenting their musical number. La Gran Familia gained great popularity, reaching the ears of many politicians who decided to support and get involved in the project. Governors like Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderon, to name a few, became great admirers and allies of Rosa Verduzco. The work carried out there was so recognized that even during a visit by Queen Elizabeth of England to Mexico, she requested to meet Rosa Verduzco, in addition to donating a bus for transporting the children and money to build a gymnasium. Rosa agreed to the meeting, but added a condition to the Queen's request. She was willing to receive her if the children could be present at the venue and share a meal with her and the prince consort, as well as offer them a musical number. Rosa Verduzco made it happen. It was known that with her undeniable determination, she could achieve everything she wanted, and she had already proven it over decades. Thanks to that defining character, over the years, hundreds of children were welcomed into that home. All were received. However, as often happens in such cases, not everyone was very happy with her way of being. Rosa Verduzco faced controversies from the beginning of her project. One of the first reasons she was criticized concerned the location of the shelter, as it was located in an affluent area of the city. Her neighbors were not willing to share space with an establishment that, at first glance, looked deplorable, as it had been built by inexperienced hands, and occasionally some walls would crumble and had to be rebuilt. However, there were more terrifying reasons to judge what happened at La Gran Familia. Amid so much kindness and generosity seemed to hide a secret that only those behind those doors seemed to know, or at least someone that no one dared to tell, for fear of Rosa's reprisals. It was very common among the neighbors of the city to see her in the streets with a group of children. Some were sent to beg for money or sell newspapers to collect money. Meanwhile, others, the more privileged or at least chosen by her, accompanied her to have a chocolate she invited them to. But it was on these occasions that Rosa's authoritarian character became visible to those outside the shelter. In popular celebrations, when the town gathered in the streets, Rosa sent the children to ask for toys and authorized them to bite people who refused to give them anything. On the other hand, merchants or anyone who crossed her path were obligated to make some type of donation that Rosa demanded. The woman had the freedom to do and undo. It was evident that she had a power that exceeded her good intentions of running a home for children. Soon, the inhabitants of the city realized who this popular personality really was. She was greatly admired to the extent that parents threatened their misbehaving children with sending them to Rosa's place, as if that was the worst punishment they could receive. Everyone was aware and divided between those who praised her and those who hated her. However, what seemed unnoticed by the authorities was the actual happenings at the shelter, as no one dared to even visit the place occasionally to ensure it was operating according to governmental regulations. For 60 years, Rosa operated with perpetual impunity, aided by a corrupt system that delegated to one person the work others were incapable of doing. But the truth hidden beneath her kindness and generosity was unmasked in July 2014, after receiving more than 50 complaints from people external to the shelter and survivors of that hell. The Attorney General's Office of the Republic intervened at La Gran Familia to begin an intense search. Families of people who had been through the place and those who had experienced the mistreatments recounted to authorities about extreme conditions of insalubrity, carnal abuses, physical punishments, and deprivation of freedom. During the search at La Gran Familia, the police confirmed the huge amount of spoiled food that was provided to the children, which consequently led to severe cases of malnutrition. Among the testimonies, a survivor recounted being forced to eat flies just to get something in his stomach. Furthermore, other horrifying confessions reported that an endless number of crimes occurred there, threatening the integrity of the children, with numerous cases of abuses perpetrated by the same teachers or caregivers of the shelter. Some stated that within the establishment, There were many pregnant women who, after being forced to give birth, had their children taken away and registered under the Verduzco surname, thereby depriving the mothers of any rights over their babies. Thousands of children were adopted by Rosa Verduzco, despite its illegality, and worse yet, nobody stopped her from committing the crime. On the contrary, it was allowed. What Rosa did next with those children is even more heinous. Having legal custody of the adopted people allowed her to keep them away from their families until they reached adulthood. Whenever their relatives tried to visit them, they were violently expelled from the institution. But later, when they were supposedly able to finally go out into the world as restored individuals, Rosa demanded an exorbitant sum of money in return as she had authority over them, effectively finding under that excuse a way to traffic people. It was impossible for these families to gather the demanded sum, so some never managed to leave. Moreover, if they tried to escape, they faced brutal beatings and confinement in cells, to the point that one of the victims reported that after a failed escape attempt, their ears were cut off as punishment. What had once been a shelter had ultimately become a prison. Long list of testimonies exposed the tortures and crimes committed within La Gran Familia. At the time, the Attorney General's office witnessed firsthand the deplorable state of the facilities. Children sleeping in broken bunk beds among trash, rats, and bed bugs, completely dirty bathrooms, and terrible infrastructure. The nauseating odor emanating from the place could be felt from the street, with excrement, urine, and decomposing food revealing the reality that was lived there. It was evident that the place was neglected, and the money from donations was not being used for improvements. These findings cast doubt on the benevolence that had positioned Rosa Verduzco as a legend, a saintly figure in Mexico and the world for decades. Thus, finally, on July 15, 2014, the 81-year-old woman and 6 of her assistants were arrested. Meanwhile, more than 600 people living there, including minors and adults, were rescued from the precarious conditions. Despite all the evidence against her, Rosa Verduzco was released without any charges due to her delicate health condition. The burden of pre-existing illnesses, such as diabetes and heart problems, led to physical and cerebral deterioration, requiring her to be hospitalized. While outside the building, a crowd gathered to pray for her speedy recovery. Others protested against the justice system's decision for not acting in accordance with the reported evidence. Finally, 2 years later, at the age of 84, after being hospitalized again for 20 days, Rosa del Carmen Verduzco passed away due to a sudden stroke. As for the other accused, out of the 6, only 2 were charged with the crimes committed. The others were released just like Rosa. In 2016, 2 years after the discovery of the truth, the Attorney General's office declared itself incompetent to follow up on the investigation into the case, deciding to leave it in the hands of the state. To everyone's surprise, the case remained unresolved, without any resolution, and much less any detainees paying the sentence they deserved for the committed crimes, including deprivation of liberty, the abuse suffered by the children, and the trafficking of them, among other horrific acts. The nickname "The Boss" was not given to Rosa randomly. It was her political contacts who called her that due to her decisive character, her authoritarian personality, and her ability to run a business of such magnitude. What never became clear was how a person with such a strong vocation for service from an early age turned into such a sinister figure, forgetting the true reason why she was there. Some theories suggest that she was involved with Mexican cartels and that La Gran Familia was an ideal place for money laundering. Others believe her ties with politicians personally benefited her, and in exchange for those favors, she forced people to vote for her allies. Indeed, there were those who claimed she was an ambitious woman, extremely strict, who enjoyed others suffering and having control. The reality is that today, the population is divided between those who choose to believe in her good intentions, considering her a saint in life, and those who assert she was one of the most evil people in Mexican history. This contradiction has sparked discussions, even among renowned personalities in culture and politics. What cannot be forgotten is that once again the judicial system has been incapable of providing a certain response to a population that for years hoped the truth would be revealed, and that when it finally happened, nothing changed. Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco was a charming young Mexican psychologist, well known for her love of staying fit and active. She took great care of her petite figure, delighting in her own beauty and charm. With her light, wheat-colored complexion, long black hair, full lips, and deep-set eyes, she was a sight to behold. Maria Alejandra loved spending time at the beach, basking in the sun to maintain her impeccable tan. Following in her father's footsteps, the esteemed psychologist and renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Alberto Eduardo, Maria Alejandra held a deep admiration for her father, which ultimately inspired her to pursue a career in psychology. She specialized in treating adolescents and young adults dealing with depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders. Her practice was located on the Roma Sur neighborhood in Mexico City. As a divorcee and a mother of two, Maria Alejandra was eager to find love again and create a new home for her family. However, her divorce had not been amicable. In fact, in 2011, she became involved in a shocking incident against her ex-husband. According to his statements, which remain anonymous as per authorities' decision, the incident occurred after their separation. He had gone to visit their children when Maria Alejandra asked him to enter the living room and sit on a strangely plastic-covered sofa. At first, he refused, but she insisted, claiming their daughter had a surprise for him. Reluctantly, he agreed to blindfold himself and take a seat. After several minutes of silence, not hearing any sounds from his daughter or Maria Alejandra, he grew suspicious. Just as he was confirming his suspicions, he felt a severe blow to his head. Struck by the fireplace poker, instantly removing his blindfold, he pleaded with his ex-wife to calm down. But she continued her assault. In a desperate attempt to escape, he realized the door was locked. With her ex-husband now fully at her mercy, Maria Alejandra grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed him in the abdomen and back. Cornered and in severe pain, he tried to wrest the knife from her grasp, only for her to bite his arm. The woman tried to inject him with a substance using a syringe, but he struggled and managed to get her off of him, eventually escaping. The couple's daughter, who had witnessed her parents violently confront each other on numerous occasions, saw everything that happened that traumatic night. In none of the previous instances of violence have the couple sought intervention from authorities. However, this time was different. The man believed that Maria Alejandra had gone too far, so he decided to report her. According to the files, the psychologist was accused by the Homicide Prosecutor's Office of the Mexico City Attorney General's Office of Attempted Homicide. Maria Alejandra was taken to jail, and the 67th criminal judge issued a pretrial detention order. Later, the charge was reclassified to attempted mitigated homicide. On June 14, 2012, she was sentenced to serve 1 year and 4 months in prison. However, Maria Alejandra and her lawyers quickly mobilized to obtain various benefits. As a result, she was released after obtaining a sentence substitution for the payment of fines, as well as conditional suspension of the sentence or compensation for material damage, a fine of 18,843 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,009 at the current exchange rate, and for moral damages compensation, 31,000 200 pesos, approximately $1,836. Despite obtaining these advantages, the defense lawyers were dissatisfied with the judicial resolution. They argued that Maria Alejandra had acted in self-defense, claiming that her ex-husband used to beat her. Therefore, they filed an appeal against the sentence, which was reviewed by the magistrates of the 9th Criminal Chamber. Ultimately, these magistrates determined that the woman was not criminally responsible and ordered her full release, lifting the sentence. Upon her release, Maria Alejandra returned to her psychology practice as if nothing had happened. The image she projected ultimately worked in her favor, as she presented herself as an empowered victim who had overcome gender violence. But with a new life came a new victim. Back in her practice, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera Cuellar, a 41-year-old Mexican businessman. The man was the son of Adrián Carrera Fuentes, a former director of the now-defunct Federal Judicial Police, who had had a long and fruitful career in law enforcement, holding chief positions in different institutions. Adrián, Alan's father, established several businesses aimed at supplying the construction sector with materials. He specialized mainly in the sale of tiles and founded a chain of stores in southern Mexico. While his commercial establishments were legitimate, Adrián had mafia connections. Consequently, he was removed from his position to face legal proceedings and was charged due to his direct ties with the Juarez cartel, a Mexican criminal organization involved in drug trafficking and other illicit activities. This group controlled a significant percentage of drug trafficking from Mexico to the United States. The organization was led by Amado Carrillo, who died in 1997 in a Mexico City hospital after undergoing extensive plastic surgery to change his appearance. Adrián was accused of providing protection to both Carrillo and Juan Garcia, the leader of the Gulf Cartel. Garcia was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in the 1990s until his arrest in January 1996. He was later extradited to the United States, where he was convicted on 22 counts of money laundering, drug possession, and trafficking. These events are significant due to their direct and indirect impact on Alan's life. Since Adrián was associated with such influential figures in the criminal world, it was anticipated, given the accumulated evidence against him and his own confession, that he would spend at least 20 years in prison. However, by participating in the Witness Protection Program during the investigation of the Juarez cartel by the Attorney General's Office of Mexico, he was released on July 18, 2000, to dedicate himself entirely to his businesses. Meanwhile, Alan joined the family business, managing the tile stores founded by his influential father. This role not only helped him earn a good income, but also left him with a lot of free time. He was married and had a daughter, but in early 2011, he divorced his wife, leaving him devastated, depressed, and struggling with alcoholism. That's when he decided to seek therapy and started attending psychological consultations with Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father. At the same time, his teenage daughter, affected by her parents' breakup, started attending sessions with a psychologist to learn how to cope with the consequences of their separation and to manage this traumatic process. Her father's therapist recommended this, and she ended up discussing her issues with Maria Alejandra. Alan accompanied his daughter to the clinic, and after the third session, Maria Alejandra asked the girl to introduce her to her father, claiming professional reasons. She said she wanted to talk to him to make better progress in therapy. However, this was just an excuse, as Maria Alejandra wanted to get to know Alan on a personal level. It didn't take long for them to start a romantic relationship. When the teenager found out, she was furious and stopped attending the sessions, but not before confronting Maria Alejandra about her misconduct. Maria Alejandra, assertive and intimidating, threatened to kill the young girl if she interfered with the new relationship. After a few weeks, what started as casual dates and romantic encounters turned into a formal marriage proposal from Alan. he decided to start a new life with Maria Alejandra, completely unaware of the reasons behind her separation from her ex-husband. One weekend in April 2014, Alan went to visit his family and introduced Maria Alejandra as his soon-to-be wife. They informed everyone that they would be getting married within a week, and she even mentioned that she might be pregnant. The wedding took place the following Monday, but no members of the Carrero family attended. They weren't invited under the premise that the ceremony would be very intimate. Only Maria Alejandra's father, his wife, and their children attended. Maria Alejandra, seemingly perfect, soon revealed her true nature. After the wedding, things started to change drastically. The newlyweds' relationship began to turn tumultuous, though there are not many details about what transpired between them. As Alan was a very reserved man, it is known that violence escalated in their interactions. Alan's family disapproved of his relationship with Maria Alejandra, noticing that he became more prone to anger and seemed increasingly worried. For this reason, all of Alan's loved ones preferred to keep their distance from his wife. At some point, Maria Alejandra, who had no regard for privacy, went through Alan's phone and allegedly found compromising messages that suggested he was involved with another woman. She claimed this was the final straw, stating that she was tired of enduring constant mistreatment from Alan and was unwilling to tolerate his infidelity as well. Convinced that trying to save the relationship was futile, she did not want to try therapy. She also didn't consider legally ending the relationship through a divorce, as they both had done with their previous marriages. To her, there was only one way to solve the problem: eliminate her husband. From that point on, she coldly calculated every step to execute her plan perfectly. Meanwhile, Alan seemed unaware of the extent of the conflict with Maria Alejandra and maintained his work routines and contact with his family. Despite the family's differences with his new wife, Alan remained close to his loved ones, communicating daily through WhatsApp. They respected his decisions, and although they found the marriage to be somewhat rushed, they continued to support him. Surprisingly, the family contact dynamic changed abruptly. On October 31, 2014, Alan exchanged messages with his family for the last time. Overnight, everyone lost contact with him. He didn't show up at work, at his parents' house, or at his daughter's house. Additionally, while he responded to text messages, they seemed to be written strangely. He didn't answer phone calls or send voice messages. On November 5, 2014, Maria Alejandra executed her plan with premeditation and cold blood. She waited for her husband to return home from work and gave him a glass containing a drink laced with a psychoactive drug used to treat depression and other mood disorders. The drug has sedative effects due to its composition, and it's a prescription medication that causes drowsiness and impairs movement. Once she was sure he was completely sedated, Maria Alejandra showed no mercy. She stabbed Alan in the abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool while he was defenseless, waiting for him to take his last breath. The next step was to dispose of the body. She placed it on the bedroom floor and used an electric saw to dismember his body into pieces that she could handle and store in plastic garbage bags. To facilitate transportation, she put the bags into a red suitcase. The body parts that could help identify him were placed in another bag and stored in her kitchen freezer. Once everything was in order, around 12:45 a.m., she called the security guards of the private housing estate where she lived. She asked for help to load the suitcase into her van, as recorded in the security logbook of that day. The condominium security personnel found her extremely nervous and desperate, glancing around in all directions. They asked her what was in the suitcase, and she replied that it was her father's surgical equipment and that she needed to transport it to the hospital immediately because she was very sick, and he was going to perform emergency surgery on her. During the time she was away from her residence, she scattered the bags containing the body parts in 2 different parts of the city. Upon returning home, she changed the locks on the doors and informed the residential security guard that she was going on a trip with her husband. On November 6, 2014, Mexico City police found a human torso without upper limbs. In the afternoon, they had found other human remains, including arms and legs without hands or feet, in black plastic bags. The distance between the first and second discovery sites was considerable, explaining why Maria Alejandra took so long to return to the condominium that early morning. The remains were transferred to the Institute of Forensic Sciences, where anthropologist specialists determined that they belonged to a single person. But they were unable to identify the individual at that time. To distract Alan's relatives and prevent them from notifying the police, Maria Alejandra used her husband's mobile phone to send greetings and respond to all received messages. She temporarily succeeded in ensuring that no one suspected his tragic end, buying herself time to organize a plan to appear guilt-free, just as she had done when she attacked her first husband. Alan's siblings and daughter received WhatsApp messages in which he supposedly commented that he regretted getting married and announced that he had recently started a relationship with another woman. Other contradictory messages stated that he liked being alone, and some said he was traveling. At the same time, Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father, began calling Alan's father to inquire if they knew the whereabouts of his daughter, whom he had been searching for days without any news. Later, he called Alan's parents again to inform them that he had found Maria Alejandra and that she was admitted to the National Institute of Psychiatry, seeking treatment for depression caused by Alan's supposed infidelity. He also mentioned that she had become paranoid, thinking that the police were after her, which was another reason for her hospitalization. In the midst of this web of deception, months passed, but when December came with its special connotation of family unity, Alan's relatives decided to go to his house to see him. Once again, Maria Alejandra was a step ahead. She notified them that they would not be at the location, as they had decided to take a vacation. This story did not make sense to them at all, especially after Alberto's call confirming that she was in the city and undergoing psychiatric treatment. So when the alarmed family went to the police and filed a missing person report for Alan, it only took a few days for the authorities to notice that the report matched the recently found remains. The prosecutors cross-referenced information with staff from the Center for Missing and Absent Persons. These conversations helped them progress in achieving a full identification of the victim. They compared the characteristics of the human remains with the reports of missing persons with similar physical traits. Finally, Alan's body was identified by his relatives. The officers then decided to inspect the couple's house, and upon arrival, they found Maria Alejandra. The detectives immediately took her to the police station and secured a search warrant. Once obtained, they searched the house for evidence and finally found Alan's head, feet, and hands, as well as an electric saw. The investigators found blood traces in one of the rooms and in the bathroom using luminal tests. They also noticed that the surface of the mattress and a piece of the carpet had been cut out to erase evidence of fluids. It was later determined that Maria Alejandra had used these items to support Alan's body parts. Initially, she was questioned as a witness, but fell into constant and obvious contradictions, becoming the main person of interest in the case. The investigation soon determined that she was the one sending messages from her husband's cell phone to make his family believe he was alive and not report his disappearance. Maria Alejandra claimed she knew nothing about Alan, that she had not seen him for several days, and that they barely communicated through text messages. Taking advantage of her background as a psychologist and trying to prove her innocence, she showed an admission form to a psychiatric clinic dated during the days when her husband disappeared. Initially, Maria Alejandra denied all responsibility, but Alan's body spoke for itself, and the forensic experts were able to perfectly reconstruct the events. From their analysis, the experts noted in the autopsy protocol that a wound was visible on the torso, caused by a sharp instrument that had penetrated the abdomen and was classified as lethal. With all the evidence that the authorities gathered at the couple's house, as well as at the sites where they found his remains, the investigators were able to establish Maria Alejandra's connection to her husband's cruel death. The detectives had testimonies placing her at the scene of the time of the events, and this was supported by the building's security log, which detailed the specific times she left and entered. Plus, the issue of the heavy suitcase that they helped her load into her vehicle. In addition, statements from Alan's daughter and sister revealed that the psychologist had threatened the young girl with taking her life if she opposed the relationship with her father. Although Maria Alejandra attempted to evade responsibility by admitting herself to a psychiatric center, forensic studies confirmed that she did not suffer from any mental illness. Finally cornered by the evidence, Maria Alejandra confessed to the fatal assault against her husband and admitted that she took him by surprise. However, she justified her actions by stating she was tired of the domestic violence she was experiencing. On December 10, 2014, the court issued a formal prison order for Maria Alejandra for the crime of homicide. From that moment on, information began to emerge that could implicate the woman in other fatal violent events. For instance, it was said that Maria Alejandra might have committed another serious crime against people in 2012. All this leads to suspicions that the accused might have had help from her father, who would be an accomplice in covering for her and diverting public opinion. Over the years, he allegedly stripped the man of some of his assets, according to Mexican media. Thus, there are suspicions that, in reality, the La Fuente father and daughter were highly dangerous criminals. However, justice did not establish any decisive line of investigation in this regard. After an 8-year wait, on Monday, September 5, 2022, the General Prosecutor's Office of the Capital announced the sentence. For the crimes of qualified homicide and disrespect to corpses or human remains, Maria Alejandra La Fuente Casco was sentenced to 46 years and 6 months in prison, an unprecedented punishment in modern Mexican justice. After the firm conviction, she has no right to review the sentence or to alternative measures that relieve the prison sentence. She was also ordered to pay for the damage and funeral costs, and she lost her political rights. Maria Alejandra La Fuente was a calculating woman who seems to have taken advantage of her father's influence and protection to act freely and proceed against the men who, in some way, tried to save her from punishment for the assault she committed against her first husband, using an argument that portrayed her as a mistreated lady, probably making use of her great manipulation skills. Then, just 3 years later, she acted again, this time against her second husband. Acting with incredible cold blood, she planned the bloody end and even feigned insanity to once again avoid being held responsible for her actions. But this time, she had gone too far. Nothing could save her from being harshly sentenced by justice.